Chapter 578, Floating Nathan Island, Update 1. Brother Jin, Zhang Chulan said with a confident nod, I can't speak for the Lord, but I guarantee the company will be eager to work with you. In Zhang's view, Lucian's power was nothing short of a strategic nuclear deterrent, and he happened to be Chinese, not just the self-styled king of Nathan Island. With us vouching for this partnership, other international players wouldn't dare interfere. No one wants a confrontation with the man who commands the flying battleship. Lucian smiled and leaned forward. All right, here's what our cooperation will look like. He laid out two straightforward terms. 1. The company gains unlimited free access to every resource on Nathan Island. 2. All island residents will receive legal residency in China, granting them full rights to study and work there. Those were the only conditions, simple, clear, and mutually beneficial. Lucian leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen lightly against the table as he prepared to read the final draft of the agreement with Nathan Island. Clear and precise, the 6 articles laid out the foundation of their cooperation. Article 1. Freedom of occupation. Islanders shall retain full choice over their livelihoods. Whether they wish to join our company or pursue any ordinary profession elsewhere, the decision rests entirely with them. Article 2. Legal jurisdiction. Should any islander commit a crime, Nathan Island's legal system will assume jurisdiction, handling trial and punishment according to its established laws. Article 3. Security support. Thanks to our strategic partnership, Nathan can deploy military or security assistance whenever a situation demands it. Lucian himself will be on call to lend personal support at a moment's notice. Article 4. Birth and Upbringing Program. Although Nathan Island remains closed to the general public, special permission may be granted for expectant mothers to give birth on the island. Their children will then be nurtured and developed under the full care of the World Tree. Article 5. Publicity and Promotion. We ask for your assistance in publicizing these unique opportunities. Nathan offers a limited number of childbirth placements on the island and facilitates the exchange of rare disciplines, ranging from martial arts and Taoist rites to arcane magic. This initiative lifts Nathan's long-standing isolation. Residents may maintain a simple, traditional lifestyle while safely accessing modern amenities. Moreover, by leveraging the island's unique environment, they can acquire and research arcane techniques from around the globe. Article 6. Cultural and Scholarly Exchange. As long as they remain on the island, participants may collect the world's diverse practices under one roof. Once their studies are complete, they can retire into seclusion on Nathan to conduct in-depth research and preservation of these traditions. Lucian set down his pen and looked around the conference room. There were no objections, only eager nods. This agreement was more than a contract. It was a vision for a thriving, open Nathan Island, where ancient arts and modern life could flourish side by side. Brother Jin, Lucian said evenly, I'll relay our proposal to headquarters. I'm confident senior management will respond shortly. Zhang Chulan listened to Lucian's outline and swallowed hard. Truth be told, there was no real question. The company would approve. Talent from beyond their usual ranks was in perpetual demand. Even the child of a nationally recognized elite could never rival the raw potential of a true outsider. But this plan was different. By sending an entire family to the island and allowing them to bear children there, they would produce descendants of mixed lineage, individuals neither wholly native nor entirely foreign. Anyone who understood the strategic value of such hybrids would leap at the chance. As a trusted partner, the company could grant unconditional awakening, and this recruit met every requirement. Excellent, Zhang Chulan said, pulling a slender ta token from his pocket. Take this. Once you have formal approval, upload the authorization code here, and your team can relocate to the island immediately. All logistical details have been arranged. Coordinate directly with Mumu for the specifics. Lucian's lips curved into a quiet smile. With a flick of his wrist, he transformed his palm into a token bearing the name Nathan and slid it across the table into Zhang Chulan's hand. In that simple exchange lay the opening move of a venture poised to redefine the balance of power. Lucian raised his hand once more. A glowing spatial array spiraled up under Zhang Chulan and his companion's feet, and in an instant they vanished, teleported straight onto the warships encircling the island. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for everything you've done for the islanders," they called back in heartfelt unison. As soon as they were gone, Elijah sank to one knee, his face shining with relief and excitement. All his life, he dreamed of seeing the island's children laugh and play like kids anywhere else, learning to read, watching television, even tasting chocolate for the very first time, instead of resorting to blood drinking just to survive. Under the palace's chosen guardian, Nathan Weiwu, the islanders had remained locked in a pre-industrial era. No schools, no media, no contact with the world beyond. Now, their new king had reclaimed the sacred god tree, driven off the invaders, and flung open the door to the outside world. Lucian watched him, calm but resolute. "I don't doubt your intentions," he said quietly, "but your methods were wrong. In this world, strength commands respect. If you want to win your rights, you must first build your own power." Elijah opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, but closed it again, humbled by Lucian's steady gaze. With a brief wave of his hand, Lucian shifted the subject. "Our half-hour is up. It's time to hide Nashan and the others." Outside, the island lay peaceful and empty. No enemy forces remained. Even after Ruanfeng quietly regained his composure, he slipped away from the island without a word. Lucian's eyes flared with golden light as he summoned the power of the god tree. Its vast roots tunneled deep into the land, and at King Nason's bidding, Lucian guided them into a massive arcane array beneath the soil. "Grant me access," Lucian intoned, pressing both palms to the earth. A torrent of divine energy surged through the roots and into the earth's core. The circle blazed with brilliant gold, and within moments the entire island trembled. Then, as if alive, it tore itself free of the waves and rose into the sky, soaring through mist and clouds until it vanished from sight. Earlier in the main world, Lucian had used the space gem's power to forge a floating island as the base for his school. Now, by harnessing the god tree's might and his own sorcery, he had elevated Nason into a second airborne fortress. From this day forward, Nason would drift at unknowable heights, hidden from all but those who carried the special door key Lucian himself had crafted. "Where is the king of Nashan Island?" Lucian called out. Behind him, the captains who had returned to their warships turned back toward the spot in the sea where Nashan Island had hovered, and found nothing but churning water and mist. The island had vanished as if it never existed. They stood on deck, mouths agape, visibly shaken by the astonishing sight. The following morning, Zhang Chulan, Feng Baobao, and Zhao Fangshu, the three board members, arrived at the island's skyward pier, carrying the freshly sealed cooperation contract. They presented Lucian's token, and the island's barrier opened to admit them. It was clear that, after last night's meeting, Lord Nadatong had accepted all of Lucian's terms without hesitation. Lucian, however, had no interest in overseeing every last provision. He entrusted the detailed negotiations to Limumu, Elijah, and Elena. His own focus was on a different matter, finalizing the agreement with Lu Jin. To that end, he sought out Li Muxuan. In the central pavilion, Li Muxuan looked up in surprise as Lucian appeared. The usually imperious lord showed a rare flicker of respect, still fresh from the display of Lucian's formidable power the day before. "I wish to see the king," Lucian announced. Li Muxuan bowed slightly. "My lord, the king awaits you in the royal audience hall." Lucian gestured for him to sit. Once Li Muxuan was seated, Lucian's tone turned serious. "Old Li, someone I made a pact with has asked me to help find a particular individual." Li Muxuan leaned forward. "Who is it?" "Lu Jin." At those words, Li Muxuan's eyes went wide, his pupils shrinking as shock rippled across his face. The name pierced Lucian's thoughts, dredging up memories of everything he'd been through before coming to Nason Island. He couldn't help but murmur, "My arrogance has brought me down to this. Is the thief god punishing me? I've hidden myself away, but I can't escape the karma I've earned." He turned to old Li Muxuan, Mumu's grandfather and a lifelong islander. "Old Li, don't worry. My deal with Lu Jin was only to find you. I never intended for you to be harmed. I know what you're facing. Go to Lu Jin now. No matter what happens, I'll make sure you live, and I'll bring you safely back to the island." With that, Lucian laid a firm, reassuring hand on old Li's shoulder. Chapter 579, Exiting Kwangsing. Date. "I'm not afraid of death," Li Muxuan murmured, staring into the distance. I just don't know how to face it. This should have been settled years ago. I've been running from it so long it's become part of me. Lucian watched him in silence. After a long sigh, Li Muxuan turned to him. Wang, will you grant me one request? Of course, Lucian replied. What is it? Li Muxuan's eyes met his with unflinching honesty. If Lu Jin ever decides I deserve to die, don't stop him. I'll accept whatever punishment he deems fit. Lucian nodded. You have my word. He made no effort to judge the dispute between Li Muxuan and the Sanyi Gate. In his experience, right and wrong were rarely absolute. Context shaped every moral verdict. As an outsider, he had neither the authority nor the desire to weigh in. If Li Muxuan carried guilt for past mistakes, that was his burden alone. Lucian's sole duty was to honor his agreement with Lu Jin. Should Lu Jin demand Li Muxuan's life, he would step aside, confident that if fate allowed, he could still intervene later. It wasn't that Lucian endorsed every decision Li Muxuan had ever made, only that Li Muxuan happened to be Li Mu's grandfather, and this was his promise to keep. Li Mumu had once served as Grand Chancellor of Nason. Today, she was the supreme commander of the Nasan Y Guards, a general whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by her strategic brilliance. Beside her stood Li Muxuan, a rising star in the army whose martial prowess had just earned him the honorific Guardian of Nason Wei. Together, they were the undisputed power brokers of the realm. Lucian entered the high-ceilinged council chamber without announcement. He found Li Mumu and Chancellor Zhao Fangshu poring over a richly illustrated treaty scroll at the great marble table. The air crackled with anticipation. How goes the negotiation? Lucian asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a monarch. Li Mumu rose, inclining her head respectfully. Your Majesty, the alliance is all but sealed. We have only a few technical clauses left to reconcile. She tapped the treaty and listed half a dozen points. Payment schedules, troop rotations, border jurisdictions, that still needed explicit language. Although trivial on the surface, each held the potential to unravel months of diplomacy if left too vague. Lucian listened, then waved a dismissive hand. Drop it. The core terms are clear, and our partners understand them. We're agreed on the essential matters. The rest can follow in due course. Li Mumu hesitated. She knew well that while Lucian sat the throne, he could command loyalty and obedience at a word. But once his reign ended, as all reigns did, those minor oversights might breed resentment or confusion under a less forceful successor. Better to cover every contingency while they still could. What Li Mumu did not know was that Lucian had already mastered a way to prolong his life indefinitely. He faced no mortal threat of succession, no decay of authority, and no risk of the kingdom's unity splintering once he was gone. True immortality freed him from worries about minutiae. To him, what mattered was forging a single, unbreakable purpose, today, tomorrow, and for ages yet to come. Lucian stepped into the meeting room and closed the door behind him. Across the table, Zhao Fangshu looked up from his notes. Director Zhao, I need your counsel, Lucian began. I'm planning to accompany old Li Muxuan to the Lu family estate. Zhao Fangshu leaned forward, concern flickering in his eyes. Sir, if you think it's necessary, our company can officially mediate. The Lu Patriarch is known for his integrity. I'm confident he won't make things difficult. Lucian nodded. That's precisely why we need to be proactive. Li Muxuan, grandfather to Li Mumu, is a respected leader on Nashan Island. If Lu Jin has indeed harmed him, or worse, there's no telling how enraged the islanders will become. Such an uproar could shatter our entire partnership. The company cannot allow that. Read, Zhao Fangshu said. So you want us to open formal negotiations first, then arrange a direct meeting to calm tensions, and if Lu Jin refuses to cooperate? Lucian's expression hardened. Then we'll have to persuade him, firmly, if necessary. Under ordinary circumstances, we'd never strong-arm one of the 10 Titans, especially not a member of the immensely powerful Lu clan. Their reputation in the interstellar community is impeccable. But these are exceptional times, and we must handle this matter decisively. Zhao Fangshu nodded. Very well. I'll coordinate with legal and external affairs right away. We'll prepare the official mediation proposal and ensure every detail is covered before you escort Old Li to the Lu residence. Thank you, Lucian replied, rising from his seat. Let's move quickly. The longer we wait, the higher the risk of an incident we can't contain. With that, the two men set about turning corporate protocol into the lifeline that might save not only a partnership, but countless lives across the galaxy. Lucian's eyes were cold as he looked at Zhao Fengshu. You both know what's at stake. If anyone dares threaten the company's interests, even the gods would have to bow. Lose our standing here, and Longhu Mountain itself could collapse. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Lu Jin isn't isolated. He has the full backing of the Lu family, and with the right approach, they'll listen to reason. Zhao Fengshu inclined his head. Actually, the company doesn't need to get entangled. Mr. Li Muxuan has signaled his intent to relinquish his allocation completely. He's prepared to submit to whatever trial is required and put this matter to rest. We can handle the public announcement, coordinate the logistics, even phrase it so no one suspects his connections to Nasian Island. We'll follow standard protocol. Lucian waved off the suggestion. I appreciate your help, Zhao, but this is a private agreement between Lu Jin and me. If enforcement becomes necessary, I can manage it personally. No corporate heavy artillery needed. All Mr. Li requires is a clear understanding of the consequences. If he's to withdraw under the king's decree, we simply notify the relevant parties and preserve the proper order. Zhao Fengshu fell silent. Lucian's unwavering resolve left no room for further debate. Lucian listened as Li Muxuan outlined the only known way for an omni-gifted soul to cast off their powers and reclaim a normal life. There was no official decree, no widespread procedure, but whispered among the initiated was a 7-day ritual of renunciation. First, the candidate must publicly declare their intent, giving everyone, friends, rivals, and curious onlookers, exactly 1 week's notice. Then, at an appointed time and location, they must appear before a registered notary to formalize the surrender. Those 7 days were the true trial. Anyone, participant or mere witness, could judge the would-be renouncer, demand impossible feats, impose humiliations, or even end their life outright. The only rule was that the candidate must submit, no matter how dire the demand. As a result, very few survived the ordeal. Most perished, paying penance for sins both real and imagined. Li Muxuan unfolded the final detail with a curt nod. It's set for 3 days from now, in the small valley just behind Sanyi Gate. He closed his folder. That's all you need to know for today. Come with me. I want you to meet Lu Jin. Lucian rose and guided Li Muxuan through the winding corridors of the compound until they stood before a pair of lacquered wooden doors. Lucian pressed his fingertips together and gave a single, crisp rap on the wood. From within, a deep voice answered, "Come in." Lucian pushed the door open, and they stepped into Lu Jin's chamber. At the sound of rushing footsteps, Lucian hurled himself forward, shattering the door in a single, powerful blow and storming out into the courtyard. "What's the verdict, brothers? Are we striking now?" he demanded. His lieutenant hesitated. "It's too hasty. We need more tact. I'm to plan." Lucian drew a steadying breath, then turned his attention to Li Muxuan, who had been watching quietly. "My master has sent word far and wide. 3 days from now, there'll be a full-scale ceremony in the valley behind the old Sanyi Gate ruins. If you intend to eliminate him, that's when you should make your move." Li Muxuan's lips curved into a relieved smile. Lucian studied him for a moment, curiosity in his gaze. "I never expected your patron to change so much," he remarked. Rather than bristle, Li Muxuan laughed softly. "Mr. Lu, thank you for bringing me here. Our business is concluded. When you have time, please visit the Lu residence for tea. It would be our honor to host you." Lucian returned his smile and clapped a firm hand on Li Muxuan's shoulder. "I look forward to it." He glanced at his companions, then gently guided Li Muxuan toward the main hall. As they moved off into the night, an electric anticipation hummed in the air. Lucian's lips curved into a faint smile as he regarded Li Muxuan. "Since you only have 3 days left to live, stay with me until then. Let's talk." Li Muxuan didn't struggle. She bowed her head for a moment before turning to Wang. "Thank you for escorting me this far. You may go back now. I'll be all right." Wang hesitated, concern etched on his face, but he nodded and stepped aside. Just then, Lu Linglong and her brother, Lu Lin, burst into the room. Both looked pale, confusion and alarm in their eyes. Linglong's voice trembled as she addressed Lucian. "Sir, what's going on? Did you say 3 days?" Lucian's smile deepened. Without another word, he vanished in a flash of light, leaving the siblings staring at the empty air. Chapter 580, 9 Dragons Pulling a Cart. 3 days later, in the ravine just behind the old ruins of Sanyi Gate, Lucian's group was setting up camp. They'd been told to stay here for nearly a week, despite the complete lack of shelter should a rainstorm roll in. I still don't get why the old man passed up the gate's old site and parked us in this lousy ravine, Shusan muttered to Zhang Chulan while supervising Nadutong's crew as they arranged tables, chairs, benches, and laid out food and drink. 6, maybe 7 days stuck here, with no real cover if it starts pouring. Watch your mouth, third brother, Zhang Chulan shot back, wiping a drop of rain from his forehead. The skies might just open on us any minute. Shusi frowned up at the leaden sky. But the forecast said clear skies all day, Zhang Chulan snorted. When has a forecast ever been right? He scanned the impromptu camp for an umbrella and found Sister Bauer, ever resourceful, perched a plastic bench on her head like a makeshift helmet. With a wry grin, he grabbed another bench and plopped it on his own head. By the way, he called over to Lucian and the others, Guangxing's team has arrived too. Do you think they'll cause trouble? Lucian crouched beside Sister Bauer, his gaze fixed on the newcomers from Guangxing as they filed into the valley entrance. A flicker of unease crossed his face. These weren't minor operatives. Among them strode veterans Xia Liuqing and Mage Infeng, Wan Tao, the famed weapons metallurgist, the corpse demon Tu Junfang, one of the renowned twin heroes, Ding Shiman, and the 4 hotshot disciples, Xia He, Shen Chong, Gao Ning, and Do Mei. Behind this core group trailed a host of lesser-known but still capable cultivators. Not far off, representatives from the major orthodox sects and powerful families had also gathered, many nursing long-standing grudges against Guangxing. With both sides so tense, even a small provocation could spark a full-scale clash. Don't worry, Shusan said, waving a hand as if swatting away the very idea. Neither side wants an all-out fight in this valley. Guangxing may be a 1,000-year-old evil sect, but its existence maintains a certain balance. An open battle here would be a bloodbath, and nobody here stands to gain from that. Lucian nodded slowly. For now, at least, the uneasy peace would hold. Thanks to the unspoken accord between Guangxing's senior masters and the leaders of the great sects and clans, no one here intended to make trouble. After all, the true stars of the day were Li Muxuan and Lu Jin. Any brawl would not only disrespect them but also offend Nadutong, the official in charge of the proceedings. Li Muxuan was a living legend within Guangxing, with only Xia Liuqing and Mei Jinfeng matching him in seniority, and Wan Tao a full generation his junior. As for Lu Jin, he ranked among the 10 masters, his reputation second only to the venerable Taoist priest of Longhu Mountain. Known far and wide as a paragon of integrity, Lu Jin had earned the title a lifetime without flaws. With such towering figures presiding over the event, nobody in that valley dared risk a fight. Sure enough, when the Guangxing representatives entered the clearing, the assembled disciples from the various sects stiffened and fixed them with cold glares, but no one spoke a challenge. The Guangxing disciples returned the looks without a word. They approached Li Muxuan, who sat serenely at the valley's heart, exchanged a few respectful greetings, and then took their seats in silence, ready for the contest to begin. "Look, up there!" A thunderous roar split the air. Everyone sprang to their feet and tilted their heads toward the heavens. There, cutting through the dark clouds, were 9 immense 5-clawed dragons forged of pure gold, their scales gleaming like burnished sunlight. They bore aloft an ornate chariot worthy of ancient emperors, its gilded panels carved with celestial motifs. From the chariot came a commanding voice, "Open the sky!" At once, a surge of potent chi rippled through the air. Storm clouds peeled back, and brilliant sunlight flooded the valley below. In that radiance, the dragon's true form became unmistakable, divine creatures of living gold, 9 hooked heads hissing softly as they settled into the cloud-filled basin. With the dragon's tame Lucian, stepping from the chariot alongside 10 of Nathan's elite guards. Ever since he transformed Nason Island into a transcendent stronghold, Lucian had shunned ordinary teleportation. Instead, he chose this grand spectacle, 9 golden dragons bearing him across the sky, to both awe onlookers and warn off any who might threaten him. As Lucian's boots touched down on the misted ground, the valley fell silent. every eye fixed on the newcomer. The display had been impossible to ignore and impossible to forget. Lucian had just finished weaving mimic transformation magic together with the awakening spell when his gleaming, ostentatious airship descended from Nazan Island. As it broke through the clouds, the gathered crowd froze in awe. "That's Lucian," someone gasped. So the rumors were true. He really did become the king of Nazan, and he obliterated the behemoth all by himself. Only 3 days had passed since the behemoth's devastating attack on Nazan Island. In that time, every major power had scrambled to verify the whispers. Lucian had not only dismantled the Wang family's influence, rumored to rival the ancient celestial masters, but had gone far beyond anyone's expectations. He'd crippled the behemoth, triggered a colossal metamorphosis, and flung more than a dozen enemy warships into the void of space. It sounded like nothing short of legend. Skeptics had scoffed at the talk. 9 dragons hauling a carriage across the sky? Preposterous. Yet as Lucian's ship touched down amid stunned silence, it became clear that the so-called myths had only hinted at the truth. Lucian hadn't expected his official withdrawal ceremony from the Kwangsing Alliance to draw spectators all the way from Nazan Island. Out on the public channels, everyone knew the bare bones of the story. Jin Baobao had seized the Nazan crown, driven off Behemoth, then, in his towering avatar, flung more than a dozen enemy cruisers into deep space. What nobody realized was that Li Muxuan himself hailed from Nazan Island. Because Lucian had been the only figure to truly distinguish himself in that engagement, Li Muxuan and his Nazan guards had been relegated to the background, unmentioned. Even when the corporation's communique went out, it conveniently omitted Li Muxuan's origins. "Lucian, over here, come on in, we've saved you a spot," called Zhang Chulan, waving him over. Zhang Chulan was practically beaming. He strode up the moment Lucian appeared, clapped him on the shoulder, and gestured toward a row of cushioned seats. Lucian and the Nazan contingent fell into step behind him as he guided them to a prime viewing platform, one Zhang Chulan had clearly reserved just for them. Master Jin inclined his head toward Zhang Chulan in thanks. "Xiao Jiang, I appreciate everything you've done. If things ever go south at the company, bring Feng Baobao straight to Nazan Island. I'll hold 2 slots for both of you in the Nazan Guard." Lucian caught Zhang Chulan's real intention at once. He wanted to use Master Jin's influence to scare off anyone still coveting Lucian's chi-body source, and at the same time ensure Feng Baobao's secret of longevity remained buried. Rather than object, Lucian sent Zhang Chulan a discreet message of support. He trusted Zhang's cleverness and thick skin, and he believed in Feng Baobao's strength. Once they secured those posts on Nazan Island, he could finally step back without worry. "It's settled, Master Jin," Lucian replied aloud. "Just remember to keep 2 spots open for us." Zhang Chulan's eyes brightened immediately. He'd always feared Bauer's immortality might be uncovered one day, leaving them at the company's mercy. But with Master Jin standing guard on Nazan Island, not even the company would dare lay a hand on them. Nazan Island still hovers unseen, attacked in the skies above, utterly unreachable by anyone dwelling below. What matters most, however, is that Lucian already understands the secret behind Sister Bauer's immortality, and frankly, it doesn't faze him in the slightest, for he has long since become immortal himself. Chapter 581, If You Dare Pretend, I'll Slice You, I can update. For 5 days straight, no one dared lay a finger on Li Muxuan. After all, he'd spent decades making mischief, and most of his old foes were either too aged or long since gone. His nickname, the Evil Boy, was really just a nod to his love of pranks, not evidence of a truly malicious heart. Aside from the infamous ransacking of Sanyan, he'd never taken a life. Even those who'd been on the receiving end of his tricks survived, living out their days as wary elders who'd seen it all and seldom bothered with payback. Yet instead of growing quiet, the valley grew more crowded by the hour. Travelers poured in, not to witness Li Muxuan's fate, but to catch sight of Lucian and the legendary 9-dragon chariot. Most of the young visitors hadn't heard of Li Muxuan or the Sanyan incident, so his presence alone held little fascination for them. But mention of the 9-dragon chariot, coupled with tales of Nashan Island, set their hearts racing. Fired up by legend, they surged forward like blood igniting in their veins. No one questioned why Lucian stood so calmly at the center of it all. Nor did they hesitate to press in, craning their necks to glimpse the mythical carriage said to bear the power of 9 dragons. From seasoned cultivators to wide-eyed novices, everyone wanted a look, and perhaps a touch, of the wonder that had drawn people from every corner of the realm. Amid the clamoring crowd, Limousin's lips curved into a lazy smile. He watched the throng press in on Lucian and the 9-dragon chariot, silent as a shadow at dusk. If any among them dared to pretend, if they thought they could toy with him as he'd once toyed with others, they were in for a rude awakening. Because Limousin didn't just play games. When provoked, he delivered his own brand of justice. And he meant it when he said, "If you dare pretend with me, I'll slice you." Nearly every competitor from Mount Longhu and the Luotian sect stood arrayed on opposite slopes of the valley, forming the largest assembly the martial world had ever seen, vastly outnumbering the turnout at the last great Luotian tournament. By the 6th day of the exit ceremony, anticipation had reached a fever pitch. Then at last, a lone figure emerged from the valley floor and strode toward Lucian. He was Elder Hua Guangliu, the very man Lucian had embarrassed on his wedding day. Back then, Liu had ordered Lucian to kneel and lick his shoes, only to snatch his foot away at the last moment and reveal it was all a cruel jest. Today, Liu smiled as he approached and confessed that he'd invited every rival Lucian had once crossed. Aside from those who had perished, most of them had wiped the slate clean of childhood grudges. In truth, he said, it wasn't worth dragging half the realm here, so he came alone. Lucian watched Liu's easy grin and felt a jolt of shame. How many wrongs had he amassed over the years? In the sweep of decades, perhaps they were small misdeeds, but to his conscience they bore the weight of a lifetime. On the evening of the 7th day, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Lu Jin rose and crossed the training grounds to stand before Li Muxuan. The closing ceremony of the full-scale competition was at its climax and would end with their fight. Once Lu Jin was certain that no one around them would be harmed, he threw himself into the duel. Their clash was brutal. To everyone's surprise, Lu Jin never called upon his heaven-severing jade technique, and Li Muxuan likewise restrained his water essence. Yet every strike, every parry, crackled with power, as if they had unleashed their full might. Watching from the sidelines, Lucian couldn't help but let out a breathy laugh of admiration. Lu Jin's strength made perfect sense. He was a top disciple of Zuo Ruodong and had long since mastered the famed 3-1 refinement method. But Li Muxuan's skill was nothing short of astonishing. Trained only on the backward sequence of the countercurrent furnace by a third-rate master from the alien world, he had, through our talent alone, refined those same 3 streams to a level rivaling a top master. To see him stand toe-to-toe with Lu Jin was proof enough of his genius. If Li Muxuan ever opted to join the Sanyi sect, Lucian thought, he would become an unstoppable force. The crowd, enthralled by the brutal duel, murmured that their journey had not been in vain. "It's over," someone shouted as the final clash rang through the arena. For a full hour, Lucian and Li Muxuan had traded blow for blow, each strike more violent than the last. Spurred on by Li Muxuan's deliberate taunts, Lucian finally cast aside every lingering doubt and poured his life force into one last, desperate surge. With a roar that shook the ground, he shattered the barrier to the 3rd rebirth tier. In an instant, his power exploded outward, his flesh and bones glowing with immortal energy, and he decisively overwhelmed Li Muxuan. As Li Muxuan crumpled, barely clinging to consciousness, Lucian stepped back. He watched the recovered ceremonial mallet, the symbol that marked the end of a trial, being brought forward. Then, his voice cold and clear, he pronounced judgment. "Li Muxuan, I'm granting you one final chance. Swear you'll never orchestrate schemes against me again. No hidden plots, no underhanded tricks, and no meddling through your rootless allies. Do this, and today you'll stand among the gong-bearers. From now on, the gates of the Sanyi clan will be wide open to you." With that, Lucian lowered the mallet, sealing both the verdict and his own ascension into the 3rd rebirth tier. Lucian's knees hit the cold stone floor as Lu Jin's guards dragged him into the chamber. His lips were split, his tunic soaked with blood, but he raised his head to meet Lu Jin's glare. "I know it was me who shattered Zuo Ruotong's rebirth charm." Lucian began through clenched teeth. "His death lies squarely on my hands. But don't be mistaken, the ones who destroyed the Sanyi Destroyer weren't some nameless rogues. They were the sect elders themselves. Ever since Gino vanished, there's been no trace of him. He could very well still be alive. A raspy cough shook Lucian, and a thin line of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. He forced out each word. You ask me to plead for my life, and I will, if you agree to my condition. Otherwise, I know you'll never let me live. For a long moment, Lu Jin said nothing. The only sound was the drip of blood onto cold stone. I withdrew from the world, Lucian continued, voice cracking. I wanted no part in these endless power struggles. But Gino, he was the only one who truly cared about us. You call him a monster, but to me, he was our savior. He paused, swallowing thickly. Yet your saint abandoned you all and disappeared without a word. Lu Jin's expression twisted with restrained anger. Finally, he growled, And what would you have me do? Lucian straightened as much as his bruised body would allow. Let me live. If I survive this, I swear I will find Gino, and I will serve him as his disciple. Brother Lu, whether you accept my terms or not, this is my answer. Lu Jin's face went ashen. Fine, he hissed. If this is what you want, then die. In a heartbeat, he hooked his fingers around Li Muxuan's temple and drove them inward. A sickening crack rang out as Li Muxuan crumpled to the ground, his life extinguished in an instant. A stunned silence fell over the hall. Everyone who knew Lu Jin as the impeccable gentleman had assumed he wouldn't actually kill. Yet there lay Li Muxuan, motionless, blood seeping into the marble floor. It's your own fault, Lu Jin muttered to the corpse, voice low and unsteady. Serves you right, now only Wugensheng remains. Li Mumu's anguished cry cut through the hush. Grandpa. His eyes blazing with tears, he lunged forward, only to be halted by Lucian's firm hand on his shoulder. Stand back, Lucian said quietly. We can still save him. He dropped to one knee beside Li Muxuan, placing both hands against the young man's head. A pale light flickered at Lucian's fingertips, probing for a pulse. At the sight of Lucian's healing aura, Lu Jin's expression snapped into fury. With a roar, he surged forward and struck Lucian full in the jaw. Lucian's head snapped back, the forced blow sending a jolt of pain through his body, but he held fast, determined to keep the line between life and death from collapsing entirely. Hands off him! Lucian's voice rang out like thunder. Before anyone could react, Lu Jin, freshly broken through to the third level of reverse life cultivation and nearly rivaling the old master in strength, suddenly found himself slapped aside by Lucian's palm. The impact sent him hurtling through the air, tumbling nearly 2 miles before he crashed to the earth in a cloud of dust. Lucian stepped forward, his expression cold and unyielding. You can put on a show for everyone else, he said, voice low and dangerous, but if you ever dare to cross me again, I won't bother warning you next time. Chapter 582, Marvel Parallel Universe. Come back to me. Lucian's voice rang out as he unleashed the soul-sealing technique, reaching into the ether to reclaim Li Muxuan's departed soul. With delicate precision, he bound it and guided it back into Li Muxuan's battered body. Both of Lucian's hands glowed with healing magic, weaving light across every wound. In under a minute, the bleeding stopped, the torn flesh knitted itself, and Li Muxuan's eyes fluttered open as he pushed himself to a sitting position. Am I alive? Li Muxuan tested his arms and legs, disbelief in his voice. Lucian offered a calm, reassuring smile. I promised I'd save you. Since you refused my help against Lu Jin, I plan to let him finish you off, and then bring you back myself. Just remember this. You've died once now. Your life isn't yours alone anymore. It belongs to Nason Island. Li Muxuan stared at his restored body, his voice trembling. There was a hole in my head, and yet you healed me? Spectators who had gathered around to witness the duel gaped in astonishment. Many had assumed Li Muxuan was beyond saving. They couldn't believe their eyes. He's really alive again? Before anyone could recover their senses, a gust of wind announced Lu Jin's return. The challenger, who only moments ago had been hurled nearly 2 miles by Lucian's power, came charging back into the clearing, rage and shock warring on his face. Chaos erupted as onlookers whispered, and Li Muxuan struggled to his feet, mind already racing toward the next clash. Lucian simply watched, his expression unreadable, knowing full well that today's duel was far from over. Lucian's breath caught in his throat when Li Muxuan stepped forward, alive and unharmed. His mind snapped back to clarity. He turned to Lu Jin and spoke firmly. You slew Limuxuan once, but I revived him. His life no longer belongs to you. And there's one more thing. Wu Gensheng has been dead for a long time. Don't waste your breath looking for him. From now on, Limuxuan will remain here on Nason Island as a Nason guard. With that, Lucian completed the teleportation spell. In an instant, he and Limuxuan appeared beside the dragon chariot. The nine-headed golden dragon roared, bursting from the valley and carrying them back to Nason Island. Lu Jin slumped to the ground, relief washing over his face. Wu Gensheng is truly gone. At last, my teacher can rest in peace. The Trinity sect's vengeance is fulfilled. Once they returned, Lucian crafted a handful of door key tokens for Li Mumu, sealing magical access to the island's hidden vaults. Then he withdrew into complete isolation, dedicating himself to the study of the sacred tree scripture and the six-storehouse immortal thief technique, two legendary arts capable of devouring and refining all energies to fortify the body. Meanwhile, in the main Marvel universe, Lucian's eyes fluttered open. He found himself reclining on a padded mat inside the school's training chamber, the afterimage of Nason Island fading as he prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. Lucian paused in the lab, eyes fixed on the holographic readouts hovering before him. It's time to push my mutant abilities further. Originally, his powers had been modeled on Professor X's telepathy and Magneto's magnetism, but they'd only reached a rudimentary level 2. Since then, however, his mastery over magic had granted a surge in mental energy, so much so that his psychic prowess now rivaled a prime Professor X. Likewise, by integrating the electromagnetic signature of Misaka Mikoto's clone, his control over magnetism had blossomed to match the old Magneto's cinematic heights. Yet despite these gains, Lucian found himself at an impasse. Breaking through to the next tier, what he called the single universe level, required a fundamental leap in his life force. And no matter how diligently his countless interdimensional clones trained, they could not accelerate that transformation overnight. Whether he tried to boost his raw power or to construct a custom dimensional pocket in which to grow stronger, the process demanded far more refinement and patience than he currently possessed. Lucian had always been fascinated by the mutant mythos in his favorite comics. In those stories, mutants aren't the result of natural evolution, but of a deliberate act. Eons ago, when humanity still resembled primitive apes, the explorer god Oneg seeded certain hominids with a latent X gene, unlocking extraordinary potential. Over countless millennia, that gene spread and evolved, giving rise to the mutant race. Because Earth itself is said to be the universe's focal point of primal energy, its humans, and by extension, its mutants, can attain power of near unlimited scope. Take Franklin Richards, for example. He's portrayed as a genuine multiversal powerhouse, casually warping time and space, bending causality, reshaping reality, even fashioning entire universes. Ever since learning these comics' rules, Lucian has dreamt of testing his own gift. He admires Professor X and Magneto, but their telepathy and magnetokinesis feel almost pedestrian compared to the godlike feats he craves. Someday, he hopes, his mind will be strong enough to seize control of every human consciousness on a planet. No cerebral amplifiers needed. And until that day comes, he remains hungry for more power. Lucian's ambition had grown far beyond the graceful upending of nuclear submarines or the heaving of the Golden Gate Bridge. He longed to command magnetism on a truly cosmic scale, enough to shift entire planets, just as Magneto does in the comics. Until now, the idea had been little more than fantasy, but his chance had finally arrived. Not long ago, Deadpool had burst into Lucian's study through a breach in space-time, wielding equipment stolen from the Time Administration. In the aftermath, Lucian managed to salvage a trove of coordinates pointing to countless parallel Marvel universes scattered across the void. Among them lay one reality where an imminent cataclysm promised exactly the sort of magnetic crucible he needed to sharpen his gifts, and perhaps even earn the long-lost Phoenix Force, one of the three primal ancients. Heart-pounding, Lucian slid the ring of Vishanti onto his finger. With a few whispered syllables, he retrieved the crucial coordinate and traced a shimmering portal in midair. Though his own might was not yet enough to breach the multiverse alone, the ring, augmented by the ancient power of the Vishanti, opened the way. Drawing deeply on his magical reserves, he repaid the borrowed energy almost effortlessly. Stepping through the cascade of light, Lucian emerged on a version of Earth both familiar and strange. This new world would be the proving ground for his next, greatest experiment, and possibly the gateway to powers no sorcerer had ever commanded before. Lucian swept his gaze across the street, the style of the buildings, the cut of the passers-by's coats, and felt a quiet certainty settle over him. The coordinates were flawless, and the timing was spot on. He whispered to himself, "First things first, vanish. I can't let the time administration detect me." With that, he drew in a steady breath and unleashed a pulse of temporal energy, cloaking his figure in a shimmer of warped time. The hidden field would jam any scans from the administration's sensors long enough for him to get started. Unauthorized travel between parallel universes was strictly forbidden, and though he didn't fear a direct confrontation with the administration, he was keenly aware of the higher power backing them, Loki, the elusive god of stories. Offending him would be far worse than running afoul of any bureaucrat. For now, discretion was Lucian's best ally. The Time Administration maintained order across infinite timelines with devices conceived by the brilliant and eccentric scientist Kang. But even with Kang's inventions, their manpower was stretched impossibly thin. They couldn't possibly monitor every world simultaneously, which was why agents always arrived too late. After some major event had already rippled through reality, they'd storm in to ep up the remnants. And thanks to Loki's meddling with their protocols, that oversight had become even sloppier. Lucian intended to exploit every gap in their vigilance, just carefully enough to stay off their radar. The Time Management Bureau generally ignores inter-universe travelers so long as they cause no damage. Deadpool had jumped through timelines countless times before the Bureau finally noticed and dragged him back. If he's careful now, once his mission is complete and he returns to his own universe, they may never even realize he was gone. Chapter 580 Magneto, Part 2. Target identified, Eric Magnus Lancher. Following the Golden Arrowhead's guidance, Lucian shot forward through the sky, homing in on his quarry. His mission, find the world's Magneto. The signal led him to a steel mill on the outskirts of Pruszków, Poland, August 1983. Inside the vast foundry, among the roar of furnaces and the hiss of steam, he spotted him. The legendary Magneto stood at a control panel, clad in a grease-stained uniform and a white safety helmet. He manipulated levers and dials like any other laborer, his posture unassuming. Ever since the disastrous breakout in '73, Eric Magnus Lancher had been a fugitive, declared public enemy number one. Yet here he was, working in anonymity, hidden beneath the guise of a humble steelworker. Word had it that during his escape he met a Polish woman, fell in love, and settled down. They married, had a daughter, and Eric had buried his past behind the clang of hammers and the roar of molten metal. He'd traded his fearsome reputation for the simplicity of everyday life. "Ah!" a shout rang out nearby. Lucian's eyes snapped to the source of the alarm. A heavy chain, bearing an enormous ladle of molten steel, had snapped. The glowing crucible plunged downward toward an unsuspecting coworker. For a heartbeat, both men froze. Then, without thinking, Eric lifted his hand. Around him, an invisible force rippled outward and arrested the descending ladle in midair. Its blistering heat locked in place like a frozen sculpture. Sparks fluttered in the air as the molten steel stilled. In the next instant, the worker bolted away, saved. The foundry floor fell silent, save for the thump of the ladle as it settled gently onto the rail. But someone had witnessed the miracle. From an elevated platform a few yards away, another laborer stared, eyes wide, at the forbidden display of power. In that long, suspended moment, the secret of Eric Magnus Lancher's new life hung trembling on the brink of discovery. It seems I arrived just in time. Lucian hovered invisibly above the factory roof, a satisfied smile playing on his lips as he watched the night shift end below. He remained silent, observing Magneto slip away from the plant and hurry home through the gathering dusk. Moments later, Magneto burst through his front door. Inside, his wife was folding laundry in the living room. He dropped his bag by the door and, still catching his breath, blurted out, "I saved that man." She paused, her eyes softening. "You did the right thing. You saved a life." Magneto ran a hand through his hair, worry etching his features. That's not the point. If anyone connects the rescue to me, if they discover I have powers, they'll expose you too. We can't stay here any longer. Tears welled in her eyes as she glanced around the familiar room. But this is our home, our daughter's home. After 10 years, it's hard to imagine leaving. Gently, he took her hands. Home isn't a place, it's us. When we first met, I trusted you with my secret. Now I need you to trust me again. Lucian scanned the dim, moonlit clearing, every rustle of leaves sending a fresh jolt of fear through him. We can't stay here any longer. It's too dangerous. His wife's face went pale. I'll go find Nina. She turned and dashed back toward the house, panic propelling her over the threshold and into their daughter's bedroom, only to find it empty. Checking the backyard yielded the same result. Heart pounding, Lucian joined her, and together they plunged into the woods behind their home. Not far in, they spotted Nina, surrounded by more than a dozen police officers, each clutching batons and coils of rope, eyes trained on the tree line, as though waiting for Lucian himself. The tension was electric. Lucian stepped forward, raising both hands in a gesture of peace. Take me. Just let my daughter go. For a moment, relief flickered in his wife's eyes as the officers relaxed and advanced to free Nina. Then, in a heartbeat, everything spiraled out of control. Emotion overwhelmed the young girl. Nina's eyes flared with panic and power as her mutant ability burst forth, summoning the owls of the forest into a silent, lethal descent. Feathers and talons flashed in the moonlight. Officers staggered under the assault. Amid the chaos, a desperate policeman loosed an arrow, a simple wooden bolt, and it flew straight into Lucian's wife and then into Nina herself. No! The girl's scream shredded the night. Lucian's roar shook the trees. With a burst of superhuman strength, he shattered the officer's formation, casting ropes and batons aside as he surged forward. He cradled his wife and daughter against his chest, blood soaking their clothes. The forest fell deathly still. The officers stared, mouths agape, at the man who held his broken world in his arms. Damn God, is this what you want? Fine, then I'll do it. Magneto's fingers snapped open the clasp on his daughter's tracking necklace. A crackle of raw power flickered through the air as he prepared to unleash a lethal magnetic surge that would annihilate every officer in the square. But before he could act, time itself seemed to shatter. A calm voice sliced through the silence. Do you want your wife and daughter to live? Magneto froze mid-motion. He whirled toward the newcomer, a young man standing unflinching amid the suspended chaos. Guns hovered in midair, shouting lips were locked in silent protest. The intruder knelt beside the two bodies cradled in Magneto's arms, then looked up with composed eyes. Who are you? Magneto snarled, voice trembling. The man gently laid a hand on each woman's chest. I'm no god, he said quietly. You don't need to know my name. All you need to understand is this. I can restore them to life. In exchange, you agree to one small condition. Magneto's heart thundered. He stared down at his wife and daughter, still, pale, and certain to remain so forever. Yet here stood a man whose aura echoed the telepathic resonance of Charles Xavier himself, and Xavier had never bent death's laws. You can bring them back? The stranger inclined his head. Yes, but you have only 5 seconds to decide. Once their souls slip beyond the veil of death, I cannot pull them back. 5 seconds. Magneto's mind raced. The raw power coursing through him fought against a single, fragile hope. With every heartbeat, the clock ticked closer to an impossible choice, and to the moment when hope might be lost forever. Lucian's voice rang out in the cavern. 5, 4. At 4, Magneto's desperate roar echoed off the walls. I'll agree to anything, any price, so long as you save them, even if it costs my very soul. He didn't hesitate. In that moment, no demon, real or imagined, could have demanded more of him than he was prepared to give to rescue his wife and son. With a quiet surge of power, Lucian thrust his hands forward. He coaxed the drifting souls of Magneto's wife and boy back into their bodies, then drew out their wounds and sealed them with a soft glow. He leaned back, eyes steady. I'm no demon, he said quietly. Your soul isn't mine to claim. I just needed your cooperation. At the familiar voices, the pair's eyes fluttered open. First came the wife's relieved cry, Eric! Then the boy's voice rang out, Dad! Magneto staggered forward and wrapped them in a fierce embrace, tears of joy streaming down his face. After a long moment, he drew a steady breath and turned to Lucian. "Whatever your reasons, thank you. You've given me back my family." Lucian inclined his head. "Before we go," he said, stepping past the stunned officers who had rushed in, "there's one more thing." He raised a hand in a casual gesture. The policemen blinked, exchanging puzzled looks. Then their expressions cleared as if a fog lifted from their minds. "I've erased the memories of those who learned your identities, and now your memories of this place." Lucian offered a faint smile. "You'll remember nothing of what happened here." With that, he turned and slipped away into the shadows, leaving Magneto and his family reunited and safe once more. Lucian's voice was calm as he spoke into the charged silence. "From now on, you and your wife and daughter can live here as ordinary people, safe from harm." Eric, known to the world as Magneto, studied Lucian's unflinching gaze. Nothing about the shapeshifter's posture suggested a joke. Having just spared Magneto's family from certain death, Lucian's favor was priceless, and so surely would be his request. "What do you need me to do?" Eric asked at last, his tone measured but wary. Lucian waved a hand, as if brushing away Eric's unease. "Don't worry, it's nothing extreme. I just need you three to disappear for a little while." "Disappear?" Confusion flickered across Eric's features. "You mean, go into hiding?" "You don't need all the details," Lucian replied. "Just trust me and follow my instructions. It'll only be for about a week." At that, Lucian extended his hand, and a portal shimmered open beside him. Beyond its threshold lay a grand manor floating in an endless starfield, Lucian's personal refuge, perfectly furnished and secure. "This will be your home. You'll want for nothing." Eric stared at the void beyond the windows, his throat tight. He didn't know Lucian's full plan, but he believed the shapeshifter bore no ill will toward his family. Finally, he nodded once. "Good," Lucian said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'll see you in 7 days." Then, in the blink of an eye, Lucian vanished. Seconds later, he reappeared on solid ground, his form subtly shifting, black leather, a gleaming helmet, and magnetic energy dancing around his fingertips. He had taken on Eric's very likeness. Standing tall in this new guise, Lucian let his voice carry across the stillness. "I am Eric, the Magnetic King." Chapter 584, Mutant Apocalypse, Update 1. Why pretend to be Magneto? Lucian's strategy depended on one thing, luring Apocalypse out of hiding so he could seize the chance to enhance his own powers. In this alternate reality, Apocalypse isn't a looming disaster from legend. He's very real and terrifying. Born in Egypt's first dynasty around 3000 BC, he's among the oldest mutants ever recorded. His defining gift is the ability to transfer his consciousness into new hosts, absorbing and inheriting their mutant abilities as he goes. Over millennia, he's amassed an arsenal of powers so vast and so perfectly balanced that he's effectively godlike, without a single weakness. Long ago, Apocalypse ruled ancient Egypt with absolute authority, until a trusted ally betrayed him mid-transfer, trapping his mind inside the body of a regenerative mutant. His enemies then sealed him beneath the very pyramid he built, where he lay dormant for centuries. Now, recent tremors in the psychic network suggest he's stirring at last, awakened unexpectedly by forces yet unknown. Of all the abilities he's collected, one stands above the rest, the power to amplify the mutant gifts of anyone he chooses. That augmentation could turn a single telepath into a continent shaper, or a simple kineticist into a walking apocalypse. Lucian knows that once Apocalypse is fully awake, there may be no stopping him. That's why he must play his part as Magneto perfectly, drawing the old mutant out into the open, and then seize the moment to claim the one power he needs most. Lucian had studied the timeline down to the smallest detail. In the normal course of events, once Apocalypse awakens, he sets out to conquer the world. And to do so, he recruits the most powerful mutants he can find. Magneto is at the very top of that list. That's why Lucian's plan was so elegant: impersonate Magneto. By keeping his own tremendous power carefully in check and manifesting only magnetic abilities, he could sail right under Apocalypse's radar. Treated as the genuine article, Lucian would let Apocalypse do all the heavy lifting, unknowingly honing Lucian's true strength for him. The truth was, Lucian's raw power far exceeded Apocalypse's. Capturing him alive would be child's play. But Apocalypse's mental defenses were legendary, stronger even than Professor X's. No telepath could bend him to their will, and once Apocalypse realized he was a prisoner, forcing him to enhance Lucian's gifts would be impossible. A frontal assault would draw too much attention, and enlisting agents from the Time Management Bureau risked even more complications. It made far more sense to play the long con, pose as Magneto, let Apocalypse willingly advance Lucian's abilities, and maintain perfect cover. If the ruse ever collapsed, Lucian could always revert to Plan B and use brute force. Lucian shifted his weight on the forest floor and whispered, "Good evening, Henrik. What's our plan tonight?" The lead officer, Henrik, stirred awake. Blinking at the figure clad in Magneto's armor, bow and rope slung casually over his shoulder, he frowned. Lucian offered a disarming smile. "Weren't we heading out to catch rabbits in these woods?" Henrik's eyes cleared. "That's right, we hunt rabbits. And when we bag one, we share it with you." He gave Lucian's helmet a friendly pat, then signaled his men to press deeper into the trees. No sooner had they vanished than Lucian crouched, plucked a tuft of grass, and exhaled a whisper-thin spell. The blades of grass quivered, then transformed into more than a dozen lifeless forms, the very likenesses of the guards who'd just departed, and, chillingly, the corpses of Magneto's wife and daughter. He arranged the bodies in precise rows, stepped back, and closed his eyes. Donning Magneto's visage was only the first step. To fool everyone, from simple townsfolk to hardened mutants like Apocalypse or Caliban, Lucian would need absolute mastery of the disguise. And now, with the real family laid beside the imposters, he began the subtle adjustments that would seal the illusion. Lucian stood at the center of the dimly lit chamber, the faint hum of magical energy still crackling in the air. Beside him lay the bodies of Magneto's wife and daughter, illusions brought to life by his transfiguration spell. He studied their lifeless forms with a pain so real it threatened to crack his composure. "Done," he whispered, straightening his shoulders. It had taken weeks to perfect the ritual that not only changed their appearances, but also wove a new soul signature around him. A simple illusion would have betrayed him. Caliban's mutant sense could track an actual Magneto soul, not a cleverly dressed imposter. Only by thoroughly disguising his own spirit could he hope to fool the tracker. He knelt and gently lifted the girl in his arms. Her hair, once pale, had been tinted a raven black by his spell. She looked peaceful, as if merely sleeping. Across the room, Magneto's wife lay draped in his cloak. Lucian's breath came in ragged gasps. "My darling Helena, my sweet Elise," he pressed a trembling hand to his heart. "Your lives were stolen from me, so I will make them pay. I will take vengeance on every last one of them." His voice cracked on the final word, and tears brimmed in his eyes. For a long moment he stayed frozen, a grieving husband and father, utterly shattered. Then, as if on cue, the phantom bodies dissolved into motes of shimmering light. Lucian rose, his face once more calm and imperious. He closed his eyes and reached out with his senses. He felt it immediately, Caliban's approach. The mutant tracker was searching for Magneto, but his perception was blind to illusions and ordinary souls. Thanks to Lucian's soul-weaving, Caliban would see only the signature of Eric Lensher, avenger of mutant kind. Lucian opened his eyes with a satisfied smile. The trap was set, and no one could warn Professor X or Logan in time. As long as the rumor circulates that Magneto's wife and daughter were brutally murdered, and that, in revenge, he gunned down an entire squad of police officers, the official record stays unchallenged. Deep in the heart of the mutant black market, Mystique, fresh from liberating Lucian from his underground prison, slid a fat stack of US dollars across the desk to Caliban, the notorious crime boss. Same arrangement as always, he walks free. Back in 1973, she'd honored Professor X's plea and spared both Trask and the president. Mutants had been exposed to the world, and the government publicly acknowledged their rights. But that recognition was only skin deep. Shadowy agencies and clandestine labs still abducted and experimented on mutants away from public scrutiny. So Mystique went rogue, becoming a one-woman rescue squad, freeing mutants from every hidden cage and cell she discovered. To countless mutants, she had become a living legend. Caliban leaned back in his chair, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Good to see you, though you've got a new face." Mystique offered a faint, indifferent shrug. Caliban cleared his throat and gestured toward Lucian, who stood quietly by the wall. "So, Where's our guest headed next? Her expression remained cool. I haven't the foggiest, and frankly, it's not my business. I did what I came to do. The rest is up to him. Without another word, she melted into the shadows, her body folding and warping until she vanished into the night. Mystique wasn't Magneto or Professor X. She only did her best to help mutants in need, never imposing her will on anyone. Caliban gave a slow nod, a flicker of admiration in his dark eyes. Money was his true love. He ran black market deals for profit, but deep down, he respected Mystique. If he ever fell into human custody, he knew she'd find a way to save him. He motioned to his associate, who hustled Nightcrawler forward, snapped his photo for the forged documents, and stamped him a pass. Caliban leaned in and, with a perfunctory sniff of the bills on the table, offered, "Since you're here, I'll give you a tip. No charge. I felt your old friend the moment you walked in. Well, if he still counts as your friend." He paused to pocket the money, then dropped his voice. Eric Landsher, Magneto. He was found with his wife and daughter dead beside him. A squad of policemen, too. The official reports will surface soon, but you're hearing it first, Mystique. At the mention of Magneto's family, Mystique's pupils shrank to pinpoints. She whirled on Nightcrawler. How far can you teleport? The blue-skinned mutant perched on the stool, clutching his freshly minted pass. He frowned, uncertain. Anywhere I've seen, or been before. Mystique's jaw tightened. Then get us there. Mystique lifted Nightcrawler effortlessly off the tavern stool. Don't think you're letting me go it alone, she teased as he tumbled into her arms. Nightcrawler blinked up at her with those glowing yellow eyes. All right then, take me to New York. Mystique's expression grew serious. We have to reach Professor Xavier as soon as possible. He can pinpoint Magneto's whereabouts, and together we might persuade him to stand down. If we delay, the entire world could spiral back into chaos. With that, she clutched Nightcrawler's hand and vanished into the night, bound for New York, and whatever dangers awaited them there. Chapter 585, Significant Improvement in Abilities, Second Update. Lucian watched without surprise as Mystique and Nightcrawler vanished in a swirl of blue light. No sooner had they gone than two unfamiliar figures materialized in the chamber across the room. Lucian had dealt with his share of mutant business. With teleports, spatial rifts, and all manner of extraordinary powers, nothing really fazed him anymore. He said, studying the newcomers. I don't believe we've met. What can I do for you? The taller of the two stepped forward and dropped his hood. Cool light glinted off, striking cerulean skin and faint battle scars etched across his face. He spoke with measured authority. We're searching for the world's most powerful mutant, and we've heard you possess a method for finding them. Lucian inclined his head. I've helped track more than a few. Tell me who you're after. The blue-skinned mutant offered a hint of a grim smile. You may call me Apocalypse. Once, I ruled an empire beneath the sands of Egypt until I was entombed for millennia. When I emerged, I found my domain overrun by the descendants of my former slaves. Worse still, mankind has weaponized wonders that even I regard with caution. Nuclear arsenals, bioweapons, things of that sort. He paused, his eyes narrowing. To reclaim my destiny, I must gather the strongest mutants, hone their powers, and resurrect the Four Horsemen. I have already recruited Storm. She controls the very heavens, thunder and lightning at her fingertips, but 3 seats remain unfilled. Lucian folded his arms. I see. You're looking to build your own personal cavalry. Apocalypse's grin was sharp as a scythe. Precisely, and we'll need someone with the insight to locate such gifts. Lucian considered the request. Tracking a mutant, especially one of extraordinary potential, was never straightforward, but he'd faced tougher cases. All right, he said at last. I know where to start, but you'll need to tell me exactly what you're hunting for. Power level, particular abilities, any distinguishing signature. That will narrow the search. Apocalypse nodded, his lip curling in satisfaction. Prepare the coordinates. I will not fail again. Lucian swept a hand in a graceful arc. Give me the details. I'll have the data ready within the hour. As the two figures faded back through the spatial portal they'd arrived by, Lucian exhaled and turned to his console. Tracking the world's most powerful mutant was no small task, but then again, he'd never been one to back down from a challenge. With a few keystrokes and a flurry of computations, he set his search in motion. If the rumors were true, the next name on his list would shake the very foundations of what the world believed possible. Caliban turned to Apocalypse and let out a low chuckle. Of course I have a way, provided you're willing to pay the price. That evening, Lucian detected a familiar ripple in the air at his doorway. A faint smile curved his lips. So you found me. If you won't come in peace, I'll have to make the first move. The door swung open to admit 4 figures. Lucian's eyes narrowed as the leader stepped forward, a towering, bald man with blue skin and strange armor, radiating barely contained power, Apocalypse himself. Behind him stood 3 allies, the tall, white-haired black woman known as Storm, and a third figure in a sleek purple leather jacket, Psylocke. Lucian's mind flicked back to how Psylocke came to be here. Once Caliban's personal bodyguard, she'd been severed and cast into the void by the Time Administration, forced to serve Cassandra until Lucian rescued her and brought her into his pocket dimension. It was through her psychic probes that he'd learned the true state of this universe and laid out his plan. Before sending her back to Earth, he'd wiped every memory of the void from her mind, just in case it ever became useful. Now, all 4 stood ready in his study, the tension between them crackling like static. Lucian had always assumed Psylocke remained at Caliban's side as his unceasing guardian. But standing in this ruined chamber, he saw her now as something different, a fellow mutant, wary but composed. And that last figure, wings of gleaming steel fanning out behind him, could only be the angel who'd fallen to Nightcrawler in the underground fighting ring. Those once white feathers had been reforged by Apocalypse into razor-sharp blades. Lucian recognized the silhouette from a movie he'd seen, the legendary Shushan Master. "You slaughtered my wife and children," he bellowed, faking a fury that his heart hadn't felt. "I haven't even crossed my own threshold yet, and you've already dragged them to hell. Now it's your turn." In an instant, his power seized every bit of metal in the room, chair legs, exposed pipes, stray nails, even shards of a broken lamp. All of it rose and whirled around him, forging a lethal tempest aimed straight at his 3 opponents. Psylocke dropped into a defensive stance, her blades flashing as she tried to deflect the onrushing steel. The winged warrior snapped his metallic feathers closed, their edges clanging like swords against the airborne shards. And at the far end of the chamber, Apocalypse stood unflinching, the deadly hailstones splintering harmlessly against his impenetrable armor. "Lucian," Psylocke called, her voice calm yet urgent. "Enough." The metal storm collapsed as if on command, the pieces clattering back to floor and wall. Lucian's hands fell to his sides. He glared at Apocalypse, his mentor, his tormentor, and then at Psylocke. "We are not your enemies," she said, stepping forward through the drifting debris. "We did not harm your family. We came because we believe you belong with us, not against us." Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the distant drip of water through cracked stone. Lucian's pulse thundered in his ears as he weighed her words. The moment of decision had arrived. Lucian rolled his eyes, then with a subtle gesture, every scrap of metal around him dissolved into piles of sand. He fixed Apocalypse with a cool stare. "So, you want me to join you?" Feigning genuine confusion, Lucian added, "But who are you exactly?" A deep, resonant voice answered. "Call me Jehovah, the sun god. Across countless incarnations I have worn many names. I was born at the brink of death to wield the purifying fire of destruction. My mission is to cleanse humanity's failings, uproot these so-called inferior civilizations, and sow the seeds of a new, superior era." Apocalypse stepped closer, his presence both magnetic and unsettling. In a low, almost hypnotic tone, he said, "Child, I know the pain you bear. Together, we can create a world free of sorrow and deceit." Lucian's eyes flickered with grief and rage. "You're right," he admitted softly. "This world has failed me. I want to watch it burn. I'll join you." With that, Lucian grasped Apocalypse's hand, sealing their dark pact. A triumphant light sparked in Apocalypse's eyes. He had expected more resistance. After all, Magneto wasn't nearly as easy to sway as his first 3 recruits. But Lucian, still raw from the loss of his family and consumed by anger, had fallen into the trap far quicker than anticipated. Satisfied, Apocalypse drew upon his vast power, ready to ignite the spark that would reshape the world. "Your power is astonishing, Lucian. Feel it deep in your heart. I'll help you push it to its absolute limit." As Tianchi spoke, His eyes swirled into a perfect white. Immediately, Lucian felt his latent X genes stir and quake, awakening with a fierce, almost volcanic intensity. His magnetic field control and telekinetic strength erupted upward like a rocket launch. Only moments ago, he could lift a shattered bridge or a fleet of warships. Now it seemed as if he were on the verge of moving planets. The difference was breathtaking. No exaggeration. It was the gulf between earth and sky. 20 minutes passed in a blur of focused energy. Tianqi's face was pale with exertion, yet his eyes shone with exhilaration and a hint of disbelief. In all his years of training mutants, he had never devoted so long to unlocking someone's potential. Usually, he'd awaken 3 promising subjects in under a minute. Lucian's latent power, however, remained far from exhausted. There was still more to draw out, and Tianqi couldn't decide whether to feel thrilled or terrified by the prospect. "Keep going. Don't stop. I can take more." As soon as Apocalypse hesitated and began to pull his hand away, Lucian snapped forward and caught his wrist in a swift backhand grip. He'd never imagined his mutant potential could expand so dramatically. The surge of power rushing through him far exceeded every one of his expectations, and there was still more untapped strength lying dormant. Apocalypse's gift was designed to unlock mutant genes, yet his own physiology was anything but standard. Centuries of self-cloning and relentless training had transformed him into something beyond ordinary life. That unique biology amplified whatever he touched, and in Lucian's case, it turbocharged his awakening. On top of that, Apocalypse channeled not only Magneto's mastery of magnetism, but also the telepathic breath of Professor X, 2 distinct avenues of growth unfolding at once. No wonder Lucian's advancement felt twice as rapid. Lucian's lips curved into a fierce grin. "That's it. Keep going." 30 minutes later, Apocalypse's arm began to tremble. For the first time, the immortal mutant felt the weight of true fatigue. With a sharp exhalation, he yanked his hand free and let the streaming energy dissipate. I've reached my limit," he panted, eyes flickering as the glow of power faded. Ordinarily, when a mutant pushes his powers to the breaking point, he ends up just as drained as any human. His body goes weak, he may even black out, and he must rest before he can recover. Apocalypse, however, has inherited a vast array of abilities that layer and evolve over time, long ago surpassing the limits of a typical mutant. Yet after all these years, this is the first moment he has ever felt genuinely spent, as though his extraordinary gifts have finally caught up with him. Chapter 586, The Drained Apocalypse, Update 1. Lucian watched as Apocalypse's steps faltered, its power nearly spent. A flicker of regret crossed his mind. Such immense energy fading so quickly seemed wasteful. Yet that disappointment was swiftly replaced by satisfaction. This outcome had far exceeded his expectations. Without Apocalypse here as his living power source, he never could have tested his true potential. He closed his eyes and let his spirit swell. Never before had his psychic strength felt so boundless. He could blanket the entire planet in his will with a single thought. His magnetic force, too, thrummed at unprecedented levels. Bending Earth's trajectory through the cosmos now seemed almost trivial. "Don't think you can stop me," he murmured, his voice low and cold as he turned to the struggling entity. Lucian's gaze hardened, one of barely concealed disgust. Yet in his expression hovered something unexpected: gratitude. Apocalypse's eyes darted over his face, initially burning with humiliation as if he'd been mocked. But the longer he looked, the more that burning shame gave way to confusion. This was no sneer of contempt. It was a look of thanks. And in that moment, even the dying Apocalypse understood it had served its purpose. Lucian inclined his head, his voice deceptively calm. "Thank you for enhancing my powers, and for granting me this opportunity for vengeance. From now on, at a single word from you, I will obey without question." He slipped effortlessly back into his ruse. His mission here had already succeeded, more thoroughly than he dared hope. At any moment he could turn on Apocalypse and end him. Yet, as he withdrew his attention from the facade, a new thought sparked in his mind. During their psychic link, Lucian had discovered that Apocalypse wasn't the invincible titan of legend. Yes, his mutant powers, especially his telepathy, were formidable, but they weren't without limits. A tantalizing possibility formed. What if Lucian could seize Apocalypse's ability to amplify mutant potential and make it his own? With that power in his possession, he could supercharge his life force, fortify his mutant gene, and unlock strength far beyond any normal evolutionary ceiling. No longer would he simply outshine other mutants. He could rival cosmic forces, perhaps even the fabric of a universe itself. After all, psychic energy is merely another kind of spiritual power, waiting to be mastered. Lucian's lips curled into a confident smile. He had modeled obedience, and now he was ready to claim everything. The true game was only beginning. Lucian leaned forward, eyes alight with confidence. Spiritual energy will always be invaluable for magic. It never goes out of style. And magnetism? It's one of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe. Manipulating metal is only the beginning. If you delve deeper, you'll discover it can amplify lightning magic, supercharging every bolt you summon. As for how to tap into the power of Apocalypse, I already have a plan. Apocalypse regarded him silently for a moment, then allowed a small smile to creep across his lips. Lucian's expression hadn't lied. He truly understood the depths of both arcane and elemental power. Often, facial expressions can be misleading, but thoughts never lie. Using his own psychic talent, a gift carried through countless reincarnations, Apocalypse reached out mentally and confirmed Lucian's sincerity. Unlike many telepaths, Apocalypse's ability is limited. He cannot erase or alter memories, nor can he exercise direct mind control. He can only read surface thoughts. Even so, he found Lucian's mind an open book, every plan and passion laid bare. Magneto, though brimming with latent power, has no such psychic defenses, making him an ideal test subject. Satisfied, Apocalypse nodded. Lucian's scheme held far more promise than he dared to hope. Master's pride swelled at having subdued such a powerful and devoted knight. On the surface, Lucian bowed politely, but inside he was quietly mocking. You really think you can read my thoughts? How naive. Many mutants possess telepathy, but most, like Diamond, are limited to simple mind reading. Charles Xavier, on the other hand, could not only peer into thoughts but also seize control of minds and bodies, even erasing or reshaping memories at will. Lucian had inherited Xavier's genes, giving him those same extraordinary psychic talents. On top of that, he was a trained sorcerer, skilled in spiritual magic. The fusion of his mutant and mystical powers made him completely unreadable. Apocalypse could scan his mind all he liked, but he would never glimpse Lucian's true intentions. In fact, every impression the warlord believed he detected was a carefully crafted illusion, planted there by Lucian himself. Let's head back to the base. After a brief rest, Apocalypse, finally having caught his breath, reopened the portal. When they stepped through, they found themselves in a huge, abandoned factory, once a sanctuary for angels, but now turned into Apocalypse's temporary stronghold. You need gear that actually protects you, he observed, glancing at Lucian and his 4 companions in their ragged clothes. With a gesture, he activated his molecular restructuring power. In an instant, each outfit rewove itself into a sleek, armored battlesuit that mirrored the design of Apocalypse's own attire. Lucian ran his hand over the smooth, dark alloy. It lacked the legendary strength of vibranium or uru, but it came remarkably close. Not bad, he murmured. Yet inside, he couldn't help but think, this guy has absorbed the powers of countless mutants, and through magic, he can imitate almost any ability. If I'd known this world better when I first arrived, if I could have seized even a fraction of those powers, I'd be unstoppable by now. But for the moment, he shrugged off his regrets. Clad in his new armor, Lucian felt ready for whatever lay ahead. At his current level, any attempt to steal Apocalypse's powers would be suicidal. He'd be cut down before he could summon a spell. There are no shortcuts around that fact. Lucian had spent years studying magic, honing his abilities methodically until they became both powerful and reliable. Mutant gifts, by contrast, depend entirely on the body's condition and can misfire disastrously if anything goes wrong. True magic taps into the universe's fundamental laws. Mastering it is like grasping the very bedrock of reality. Even if your flesh were wiped away, your soul would endure. Given the choice between fragile mutant talents and the immutable certainty of magic, Lucian would always choose the latter. Magic is the source. Mutant powers are merely an accessory. Once everyone was clad in their battle leathers, Apocalypse called a meeting with his 4 knight lieutenants, Lucian among them. He laid out a deceptively simple 3-stage plan. First, they would eliminate the world's top political and military leaders and obliterate every nuclear arsenal within their reach to ensure no nation could retaliate. Second, Lucian would step into Magneto's role, warping the planet's magnetic field to collapse the foundations of modern civilization, reducing skyscrapers to rubble and grounding every aircraft. Finally, in the aftermath of global chaos, they would seize control of the surviving remnants, forging a new world order under Apocalypse's iron rule. With the framework set, there was no turning back. The age of humanity's dominance was about to end. Lucian's master plan was nearing completion. First, crush the last pockets of human resistance. Then, under his rule, reshape society into a rigid hierarchy, mutants at the apex, humans reduced to little more than laborers, much as pharaohs once reigned in ancient Egypt. At this point, Apocalypse remained ignorant of Professor Xavier's formidable gift. He had not yet considered using Xavier's telepathy to instantly neutralize Earth's human governments and their nuclear arsenals. Lucian, however, foresaw that Apocalypse would soon uncover Xavier's power and attempt to seize his body to claim those abilities for himself. That looming moment, Lucian realized, presented the perfect opportunity for him to wrest control of Apocalypse's own ancient power and bend it to his personal ambition. Chapter 587. The Last Insurance. Here it comes. Lucian felt a titanic psionic wave sweep across the globe. It had to be Mystique. She'd raised the alarm with Charles Xavier, and Xavier was now using his telepathy amplifier to hunt down Magneto. Since Lucian had perfectly mirrored every nuance of Eric Lansher's powers and personality, Xavier's probe locked onto him without hesitation. "Hello, old friend," Charles's voice resonated in Lucian's mind. At that moment, Lucian unleashed the false memories he'd meticulously crafted, the brutal murders of Magneto's wife and daughter, suffusing them with every ounce of anger, grief, and despair he could muster. Xavier recoiled, his composed facade cracking as the raw emotion flooded in. "I'm so sorry. I truly am," Xavier stammered through the psychic link. "I never meant for. Do you really think you can understand my pain just by peeking inside my mind?" Lucian shot back in perfect imitation of Magneto's icy tone. Xavier's voice softened, pleading with gentle urgency. "This isn't the way. Eric, please, come back to me. Let me help you." Lucian lashed out, mimicking Magneto's fury, and a fierce telepathic quarrel ignited between them. Two of the world's most powerful minds locked in a battle only they could see. Their psychic clash rolled across continents like thunder, drawing a silent, ominous attention. In the depths of the astral plane, Apocalypse stirred. The immortal warlord had been waiting for this moment. With Professor Xavier and Magneto, or what they believed to be Magneto, entangled in a mental tug-of-war, Apocalypse smiled. His own gambit was finally in motion. Lucian closed his eyes and tapped into his psychic gift, probing the ebb and flow of Professor Xavier's brainwaves like a signal hacker. He aligned his own mental frequency with the telepathic amplifier Xavier had brought. Then, drawing on his uncanny ability to manipulate electronic and neurological signals, seized control of the entire system. In an instant, Xavier himself became Lucian's unwitting conduit. "It's remarkable," Lucian murmured, marveling at the fusion of mutant power and cutting-edge technology. "With this device, we hold the first key to salvation." Delving deeper into Xavier's mind, Lucian discovered more than just a peerless telepath. Xavier could not only read thoughts, he could override wills, and the amplifier extended that reach across the globe, pinpointing any individual and bending them to his command from thousands of miles away. A cold strategy crystallized in Lucian's mind. By puppeteering Xavier for just a moment, he could force him to identify and subvert every officer charged with nuclear authorization. Then, in a single, synchronized strike, all the world's warheads would fire at once, obliterating the old order and giving Lucian the power to rebuild humanity from its ashes. He initiated the sequence. The countdown had already begun. Lucian quietly extended a tendril of his telepathic power, tuning into Professor Xavier's thoughts as though he were present in the cerebro chamber at the Xavier Institute. He couldn't afford to look away now. In the film he'd watched, Xavier had awoken at the last moment and stopped the missile launch. None of the nuclear warheads ever detonated. But reality, especially in a universe full of infinite parallel possibilities, rarely mirrored fiction exactly. What if, in this timeline, Xavier failed to intervene. What if every missile went off, laying waste to civilization and leaving Apocalypse to seize dominion once more? He needed to be ready. Should Xavier falter, Lucian could intervene directly. His control over magnetism now spanned the entire globe. Whether he was at the North Pole or the South, no metal object was beyond his reach. With a mere thought, he could divert every warhead into the depths of space, where they would harmlessly detonate. He tightened his focus on Xavier's mind, determined to catch any sign of trouble before catastrophe could strike. Lucian was their last line of defense. No, Alex, her, ye, use your power. Destroy that apparatus, eliminate the host, wipe out everything in this facility. As the world's nuclear arsenals ascended into the sky, Professor Charles Xavier summoned every ounce of his telepathic strength and for a fleeting moment broke free of Apocalypse's control. Alex heard Xavier's mental command and didn't hesitate. Ripping open his jacket, he activated the specialized ring embedded in his chest. It drew an energy so violently that, in an instant, a barrel-sized shockwave erupted, shattering the maze of instruments powering the brainwave amplifier. With the amplifier in ruins, Apocalypse lost his hold over Xavier, and through him, the armies of every nation. The missiles fizzled out, their detonations aborted. No! Apocalypse screamed, rage twisting his features. In the same breath, he tore open a spatial portal leading directly to Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. Xavier's power was too great. Apocalypse's only remaining option was to possess the professor's body himself and seize those limitless psychic abilities. Lucian stood over the ruined control console, feeling the raw power coursing through him. Ever since he'd inherited Professor X's telepathy, he no longer needed the massive brainwave amplifier to dominate minds. With a thought, he could bend every human will to his own, a fact that made the prospect of seizing global rule almost laughably easy. No army, no secret cabal, no unexpected betrayal could ever stand against him. "Bring him here," thundered Apocalypse's voice from the freshly opened space portal. In an instant, the ancient mutant stalked forward and reached out, his power drawing the unconscious Professor Xavier across the distance as though he were weightless. Lucian didn't hesitate. He willed the amplifier's metal frame to liquefy and recoil, transforming into gleaming iron chains that snaked through the air and ensnared every bystander. As the last coil tightened, he saw Alex Summers, eyes burning with furious energy, preparing to unleash a devastating shockwave. Lucian raised his reinforced staff and struck swiftly, plunging Alex into darkness before the boy could trigger a catastrophic surge. Better to knock him out than to see the entire facility, and perhaps the city beyond, obliterated. He paused, chest heaving, as the portal light flickered against the walls. These people, these versions of friends and foes from another universe, weren't the exact same souls he'd known, but fate had woven their lives together in strange, inexorable ways. If he could save them, spare them the horrors he remembered, he would. Even as the chains rattled, sealing off any chance of rescue, Lucian made a silent vow. He would use this power for more than conquest. He would protect them, and perhaps in doing so, find redemption for himself. Lucian's rule is simple. Never assume counterparts from different universes are the same person. In his home reality, Wolverine, Professor X, and Captain America are his allies, friends whose loyalties he trusts. But if he ever encounters twisted versions of them in another universe, he shows no mercy. Evil variants are dealt with swiftly, buried if they deserve it. At the same time, when an alternate world mirrors his own closely, Lucian will still step in to help if it's convenient. After all, if he doesn't act now, a bomb will detonate at the school, Alex will die in the explosion, and Mystique, along with the rest, will fall into Stryker's hands. He presses his lips together. Well done, he praises himself, though only half in jest. Apocalypse, watching Lucian's calm efficiency, allows a rare, approving smile to creep across his face. With a swirl of ethereal energy, he reopens the shimmering portal. Lucian grips the unconscious form of Professor X, and in a heartbeat, they vanish. Their next stop, Cairo, Egypt. Here, among the crumbling sands, Apocalypse intends to erect a grand pyramid, an ancient vessel engineered for the rebirth of his soul and consciousness, reborn within Charles Xavier's body. This time, Apocalypse didn't ignite every nuclear warhead on Earth in a single cataclysm, but he forced them all to launch, and none can be replaced quickly. For the duration of his transcendence, humanity will be defenseless. As the first golden stones of the pyramid rise under the desert sun, Lucian knows there's no turning back. When the ritual completes, a new apocalypse will walk the world, wiser, stronger, and inhabiting the mind of one of the most powerful mutants to ever live. Airplanes, cannons, missiles, humanity's most formidable weapons, were now powerless against Magneto, freshly anointed as one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen. And should any mortals dare to interfere, the other 3 horsemen, each bolstered by Apocalypse's own power, would swiftly dispatch them. With unwavering purpose, Apocalypse stepped through the rippling portal, Angel, Psylocke, and Storm close behind. Lucian lingered at the threshold, quietly fracturing his consciousness into a thought body so he could remain hidden as they ventured beyond. Chapter 588, Scarlet Witch Wanda, Update 1. Professor! The spatial portal blinked out, and in its place stood a furious blue-furred beast. Hank McCoy let out a roar as muscle and sinew shifted beneath his skin, proof that the genetic inhibitor they'd injected into him had completely failed. With a savage twist of his wrists, he snapped the metal manacles binding his arms, shards of chain clattering across the concrete floor. Beast didn't hesitate. Across the ruined holding cells, Wanda Maximoff, known to some as the Demon Girl, and CIA operative Mark Tagg, codename Mora, were still struggling against arcane restraints. In 2 powerful bounds, Hank tore the locks apart and yanked the cuffs from Wanda's wrists, then turned and ripped through Tagg's shackles just as easily. Only then did he notice the prone figure at the center of the chamber. Professor Charles Xavier, eyes closed, face slack with shock. Beast and Wanda knelt beside him. She laid a gentle hand on Xavier's forehead, crimson energy flickering around her fingers as she chanted low, stabilizing his telepathy. "Who was that guy with Eric Lehnsherr?" Wanda demanded, her voice trembling. "And why did he leave Charles like this?" Beast exchanged a worried glance with Wanda. Neither of them recognized their captor's accomplice. Tagg pulled a wrist-mounted holo display into view with a tap. "I managed to scavenge some intel," he said, whispers of a mutant called Apocalypse and 4 so-called horsemen under his command. This attack might be the start of his plan. "Apocalypse," Wanda breathed, blood draining from her face. "That's more than a rumor, it's a prophecy." Meanwhile, Lucian had slipped away the moment alarms rang out in the Cerebro chamber. He reappeared at the mansion's front gate, his psychic cloak still active. With a quiet thought, he deactivated the stealth field and stunned guards parted to let him pass. He strode across the manicured lawn, unhurried, head held high. "Is that Quicksilver?" someone whispered behind him. Lucian didn't answer. He meant only to find out what had happened inside. But no sooner had he taken 2 steps forward than he felt a presence materialize beside him. He turned and froze. Standing shoulder to shoulder with him was a young man whose hair gleamed silver in the afternoon light. A confident smile curved his lips. Mischief danced in his pale eyes. "Looking for someone?" the stranger asked. Lucian's breath caught. Recognition flared in his chest. "Pietro," he whispered. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then, as the air settled once more, the threat of apocalypse loomed larger than ever. Yet, for the moment, neither brother nor friend could tear their eyes away from each other. Lucian stood at the wrought-iron gates of Zeville Genius Junior School, heart-pounding. In his hand was a crumpled business card, Professor Xavier's card, left behind a decade ago, the only link to the Magnetic King. Just last week, his mother had told him the truth. The man the world calls Magneto is his father. Now Lucian had come to Xavier's doorstep, determined to meet him. A figure beside him peered up at the brick facade, holding the card in both hands. He was tall and wiry, with silvery hair that caught the afternoon light. The boy turned to Lucian and asked politely, "Excuse me, this really is Zeville Genius Junior School, right?" Lucian smiled and nodded. "That's it. I'm here for the first time, too." The other boy extended his hand. "I'm Pietro Maximoff." "Lucian." They shook hands firmly, their fingers crackling with an unspoken promise of adventure. Pietro grinned. "Look at us, both new here. Must be fate. Cheers to fate." Lucian snapped his fingers. 2 cold glass bottles of cola materialized in midair. He handed one to Pietro. Pietro's eyes went wide. "No way, did you just summon cola?" Lucian twisted open the cap and took a slow sip. I can transform anything, objects, elements, whatever I focus on. Pietro took a cautious gulp, then laughed in delight. That's awesome. I can move faster than the eye, seems you. You've both got some pretty useful tricks. Lucian set down his bottle and stared up at the school's tall windows. Well, if this place really leads to Professor Xavier, maybe he can help me find my father. Pietro punched Lucian lightly on the shoulder. Then let's go see what Xavier has in store for us. Together, they stepped through the gates and into Zevel Genius Junior School, two strangers bound by powers, mysteries, and the promise of destiny. Lucian sat on a battered stool in the back corner of the dive bar, the fizz long gone from his cola. Across the table, Quicksilver rattled his bottle, eyes wide with disbelief. You can really transform money? Quicksilver blurted. Absolutely, Lucian replied, cracking his knuckles. In an instant, a neat stack of crisp $100 bills materialized before him. Gold, diamonds, anything you want. Quicksilver leaned forward, envy flickering across his face. He could lift banknotes from a vault in a flash, but that was outright theft, and sooner or later his mother would notice the missing cash. Lucian's ability, on the other hand, was its own kind of miracle. He could reshape any object at will. You're incredible, Quicksilver murmured. Then, after a beat, he asked, Hey, do you have a girlfriend? Lucian's expression hardened, vigilance flaring in his eyes. No, I don't get involved in relationships. Quicksilver waved a dismissive hand. Relax, I'm totally straight. My sister's single and stunning, and she's looking. No boyfriend yet? Want me to set you up? Lucian studied his friend's eager face for a moment, the faintest shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. The offer hung in the air, an ordinary invitation against the backdrop of Lucian's extraordinary power. Lucian tilted his head as he studied Pietro, Quicksilver Maximoff, in the bright cafe. Sunlight danced off the speedster's silvery hair, but his question was serious. Your sister, how old is she now? Is she an adult? Lucian's chest tightened. He'd once caught a fleeting vision of his younger sister as a little girl, barely 5 or 6. 10 years had passed since then. She couldn't possibly be of age yet. And the stranger before him was already behaving like her devoted big brother. I actually have 2 younger sisters, Lucian said. Neither is an adult. My eldest sister, my twin, was born just minutes after me. Pietro's eyebrows shot up. A twin? Really? Lucian shrugged. It's not a secret I mention often. Pietro grinned and clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, I want you to meet her. He disappeared for a moment, then reappeared with a young woman hovering hesitantly at his side. Lucian, this is my sister, Wanda Maximoff. Wanda stepped forward. Dark hair framed her pale, contemplative face. Her eyes flickered with something deep and unspoken. Lucian sensed a quiet power emanating from her, an energy he recognized all too well. Pietro dipped his head and melted away, leaving Lucian and Wanda alone in the soft morning light. Lucian offered a gentle smile. Nice to meet you, Wanda. She stood for a heartbeat, then sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Nice to meet you too, she whispered. Around them, the cafe's bustle faded. Lucian reached into his jacket pocket, hesitated, then withdrew his goggles, the same ones he wore to help control his own abilities. He set them carefully on the table. I know what it's like, he said softly. Growing up with powers you can't always control. You don't have to face it alone. Wanda's lips quivered and she glanced at the goggles. You do understand, then? More than you know, Lucian replied. He leaned forward. Maybe we can help each other. My name's Lucian. Her eyes filled with something close to relief. I'm Wanda. In that moment, 2 mutants, each burdened by their past, found a fragile spark of hope. The future was still unwritten, and together they had a chance to change it. Whatever you need in the future, just let Lucian handle it, she said, her tone calm but resolute. Then, eyeing the newcomer, she added in genuine astonishment, She really is a Crimson Witch. Lucian raised an eyebrow in surprise. He hadn't realized that in this universe, Pietro Maximoff, Quicksilver, had a twin sister who'd become a Crimson Witch. Yet in the countless permutations of the Marvel Multiverse, nothing was truly impossible. After all, Pietro and Wanda often appeared as Magneto's children. That actually works to our advantage, he murmured, a small smile tugging at his lips. Turning away, Lucian surveyed the empty hallway. He deliberately left a holographic duplicate of himself at Xavier's school to cover his absence while he met with the Phoenix host. In Marvel's cosmology, there are three primordial forces, powers so immense that if fully unleashed, each could challenge the very fabric of the multiverse. The first is the Phoenix Force, the ancient cosmic power Jean Grey channels. Even now, she only commands a fraction of its might, enough to fell a celestial. The second is chaos magic, the dark sorcery born of the elder god Cuthon, whose influence peaks at the nexus of alternate realities. It's this chaos magic that the Scarlet Witch wields. Lucian identified the third power type as the Fairy Force, a self-aware energy that drifts through the multiverse, devouring everything in its path. Its primary objective within this universe had been to harness Apocalypse's abilities to amplify its own mutant potential, a goal it had now achieved. But it would not stop there. It was determined to seize Apocalypse's power outright. Its secondary ambition was even bolder. Having mastered the Six Treasures Immortal Thief technique, it aimed to consume the Phoenix Force residing within Phoenix Girl Qin. Although this fragment of Phoenix power wasn't the full, multi-tiered force, its concentrated intensity rivaled that of an entire universe. If the Fairy Force could absorb and fully assimilate it, its bearer would instantly rise to single-universe level. And the opportunities didn't end with Qin. Wanda, too, wielded the raw power of chaos, offering yet another cosmic energy source for the Fairy Force's unquenchable hunger. With this development, Lucian now had the chance to wield not only the Phoenix Force, but a second Chaos Force as well. Given his fledgling status as a six-story immortal thief, absorbing such powerful energy would be a formidable challenge. Still, he wasn't worried. The road ahead was long, and he planned to remain in this universe for some time, cultivating his strength at a steady pace. As long as the Time Administration Bureau stayed out of his way, little could derail his progress. After all, the school on the other side was under Professor X's supervision, so he had no reason to fear interference there. Chapter 589, Lucian, the New Teacher, Second Update. Lucian and Kuai Yini slipped along the side corridor and headed for the principal's office. Professor X had been escorted down to the underground brainwave resonance chamber, so no one upstairs knew what had happened. Classes continued as usual, and the magic girl and the beast, who'd taken X away, had kept the whole affair under tight wraps to prevent a panic. Lucian rapped on the heavy oak door. He could sense the magic girl's aura and the beast's low rumble inside. They were undoubtedly huddled together, plotting how to rescue or appease Professor X. "Come in," called a gruff voice from within. "The principal's not here today. Who are you? Haven't seen you around in a while." The beast, whose name was Charles, assumed the knock marked another student in need of counseling. That was his department. Most of the kids at this school struggled with emotional or mental issues, and they often came to him for guidance. He opened the door, mentally preparing to soothe teenage angst. Instead, he froze. Standing in the doorway was a tall man with silver hair, Lucian, the very colleague Charles hadn't laid eyes on in 10 years. Lucian remembered how, 10 years ago, Quicksilver's superhuman speed had made it possible to break Magneto out of the Pentagon. Ever since, Magneto had owed Quicksilver a debt he could never forget. Now, Lucian stood before Professor Charles Xavier, preparing to ask about the man he still thought of as the master of magnetism. Quicksilver leaned in and quietly explained their real purpose for this visit. Before Xavier could reply, Mystique, the mysterious shapeshifter, glided over. "Oh, come on," she scoffed. "Did you watch one of his speeches on TV and get brainwashed?" 10 years ago, Magneto had been the world's most wanted criminal. Yet after those electrifying broadcasts, countless mutants had come to revere him. Mystique had never met Quicksilver in person, so she assumed Lucian's interest must spring from some lingering fanaticism. Lucian and Quicksilver entered Xavier's office. For a moment, Lucian hesitated, gathering his courage. Then he blurted it out. "Actually, he's my father." Mystique, Beast, and Cyclops all froze. Beast's brow furrowed. Cyclops instinctively reached for his visor. Mystique snapped her fingers in disbelief. "Your father, you mean Magneto and your mother." "Hold on," Cyclops cut in sharply. "Do we even know the whole story here?" Mystique fell silent. The possibilities sank in. Magneto, the world's most feared mutant, had a son who looked every bit his age. Lucian could be almost 26. For a moment, the three of them simply stared, the past and future of mutant kind suddenly collapsing into a single, breathtaking revelation. Before I was born, he abandoned my mother and vanished, Quick-Yin said, his voice tinged with sadness. I caught a glimpse of him once, 10 years ago, but I didn't recognize him then. Now I just want to find him and talk to him. The beast stepped forward and gently patted Quick-Yin on the shoulder. I'm afraid it's not that simple, he rumbled. He's been traveling with Eric, and, well, locating them both won't be easy. A quiet voice spoke up. If you're trying to track someone down, perhaps I can help. The beast turned to regard him with wary eyes. Excuse me, sir, but you don't appear to be a teacher or a student here. Are you acquainted with Pete? I only met Pete at the school gates, Lucian replied with a small, confident smile. I heard the school was looking for a signature teacher, so I came to submit my application. At that, the beast's expression brightened. Yes, we are hiring, he said eagerly. Would you be willing to help us locate this man? Behind the creature, Quick-Yin looked between them hopefully. Over the past months, the school, faced with an ever more diverse student body, had relied almost entirely on Charles and the Beast to cover every subject. They'd begun offering lavish salaries for a versatile educator, and with Charles's practically unlimited funds, money went awa. Sent the issue. The real challenge was finding someone truly capable, and now Lucian might just be the answer. Lucian tapped his tablet and looked up with a confident smile. Yes, give me a name, and I can pinpoint his location. Quicksilver, leaning against a nearby desk, arched an eyebrow. Isn't your superpower literally changing anything instantaneously? Lucian chuckled. That's only one of my talents. A crackling voice came over the intercom. On behalf of Principal Aberline, I hereby appoint you as a substitute teacher. We need your help locating him at once. Professor Oku, the school's stealth operations specialist, shot Lucian a sharp glance and motioned toward the back door. They were about to move when the thunder of rotor blades rattled every window pane. Peering through the glass, they saw more than a dozen armed helicopters lowering into formation around the campus. Soldier teams bearing sleek, though alien-looking rifles fanned out, encircling the courtyard in a perfect circle. It's Stuke, gasped Arya, the shape-shifting sorceress, her eyes narrowing. In an instant, she'd recognized the insignia on the lead helicopter. Deputy Commander Stuke of Task Force Track, the man notorious for capturing variants and delivering them to secret labs for experimentation. Before anyone could react, Stuke's terse command crackled over a megaphone. Open fire! Every soldier raised their weapon, releasing a synchronized pulse of vibrating energy. The wave pulsed through the hallways, sending lockers crashing and lights flickering as it swept through the school. Lucian braced himself, ready to protect his new team, and determined to rescue Principal Aberline, whatever it took. Chapter 7. The Silent Strike. Lucian pressed himself flat against the corridor wall, heart pounding, as a thunderous pulse ripped through the school. The sonic blast shattered glass and sent plaster raining down, but its deadliest effect was the eerie hush that followed. In every hallway and classroom, mutant students and faculty collapsed at once. The hulking beasts from the administration wing, the fire-eyed demon girl, even Silver, the speedster, all crumpled to the floor, eyes glazed over. Lucian sucked in a breath of relief. He hadn't gone down with them. His carefully placed decoy had absorbed the full force of the attack. Without it, Stecker's weapon would have knocked him out too and made him an easy captive. He fought the urge to dwell on what should have happened. In the original timeline, the school had blown apart in a massive explosion. Quine had stormed into the inferno, dragging every surviving student and teacher out of the wreckage, except Shockwave, who'd been vaporized by the blast he himself triggered. Laser Eyes and Piano had returned moments later to find Stecker's forces closing in. A small team of Laser Eyes operatives had slipped away to recover Shockwave's body from the smoldering ruins, barely dodging capture. Then, under cover of darkness, Laser Eyes, Piano, and the Nightwalkers had infiltrated Stecker's stronghold. They rescued the demon girl and the other hostages, and even freed Diamond Wolf before she could be converted into an X-weapon. But in this altered sequence, there had been no explosion. Instead, Stecker's new sonic array had laid the entire academy low in an instant. Moments ago, Laser Eyes and his lieutenants had returned to the school, expecting chaos, and found absolute stillness. Every student lay unconscious, the classrooms eerily silent. Lucian knelt beside a prone classmate, whispering his name. No response. He swallowed hard, fists clenched. If he hadn't been here to shield them, Stecker's attack could have spiraled into something far worse. Slipping to his feet, he scanned the corridor for allies, anyone still conscious to help turn the tide. The corridor light flickered overhead, painting long shadows on the walls. Lucian squared his shoulders, resolve hardening in his chest. There was still time to right the course of events. He only needed to act, and fast. Lucian crouched beside the slum, ped form of Mystique, and waved his hand. "Wake up! Quickly!" Almost at once, the dazed students around them stirred, blinking as consciousness returned. "What happened?" one of them groaned. Lucian pointed out the window, where a squad of uniformed soldiers was breaching the school gates. "Those men outside hit you with a special stun gas. I used my ability to snap you back." Mystique pressed her fingers to her temples and managed a weak smile. "Thank you. Your powers really are something." "They're small tricks," Lucian replied, shrugging. "Just enough to be useful." At that moment, Quicksilver slipped on his headphones and tapped play on his phone. "Let me handle these guys," he said with a grin. In an instant, he blurred forward, overspeed mode engaged. Less than 10 seconds later, he was back, casually peeling off his headphones. Across the courtyard, Stryker and every last soldier were bound, taped securely to the trunks of the old oaks that lined the grounds. "If this weren't the apocalypse," Quicksilver quipped, "normal people wouldn't have a chance." Lucian watched him, eyes amused. He'd known Quicksilver to be fast in his own world, but here his speed was nothing short of legendary. Lucian's reflexes are so razor-sharp that, whenever he's protecting someone, he can intercept oncoming bullets with his own body before they ever reach their target. The only way to land a shot on him is to catch him completely off guard, slipping in before his danger sense can kick in and activate his powers. That's exactly why Stryker ordered his troopers to deploy sonic grenades moments ago. The disorienting shockwaves might jar Lucian's focus long enough for a lucky shot. There's another, and even more daunting reason most attacks fail. Some opponents, like Apocalypse, simply possess defenses too formidable to penetrate. No matter how lightning-fast your strike, it's useless if you can't break through that impenetrable armor. Chapter 590, Professor, I have a plan. With Stryker and his soldiers neutralized, Hank McCoy Beast gathered the older, more battle-ready students in the mansion's main hall. Those with lesser combat abilities were assigned to stay behind, tending to the younger students and guarding the captured soldiers. Meanwhile, the stronger mutants prepared to launch a rescue mission. Professor Xavier was still in enemy hands. Hank's shortlist of field operatives included CIA agent Mora, Mystique, Raven, Shockwave, Alex, Cyclops, Scott, Nightcrawler, Kurt, Phoenix, Jean, Quicksilver, Pete, and the newest member of the faculty, Lucian. Although none of them had seen formal military action before, the gravity of the situation left no room for hesitation, especially for teleporters like Kurt, who could bypass defenses in an instant. In total, 9 of them formed the strike team. Hank led everyone down to the secret basement he'd converted into an armory and workshop. Lining the walls were 9 state-of-the-art combat suits, each crafted from experimental alloys and reinforced polymers, lightweight yet nearly impervious to bullets and energy blasts. Hank had spent weeks integrating kinetic energy dampeners and neural interface controls so the suits would move as fluidly as the wearers themselves. In the center of the hangar sat Hank's pride and joy, a sleek supersonic fighter jet of his own design. Its fuselage was coated with radar-absorbent materials, and it housed a compact warp drive prototype for short-distance quantum jumps. "We'll fly in low, warp directly above Xavier's holding cell, then drop in," Hank explained, handing out power packs and helmet comms. "Lucian, you'll lead the infiltration team alongside Mora and Mystique. Scott, you and Jean will secure the rooftop. Kurt, I need you on standby for extraction. Alex and Pete, tech support, disable their comms and surveillance grid." Each team member checked their gear. Scott's ruby quartz visor glowed faintly as he ran a systems diagnostic. Jean closed her eyes, reaching out with her telepathy, ready to cover their entry. Lucian strapped on his helmet, feeling the subtle hum of the suit's muscles engage. "Remember," Hank reminded them, We're moving fast and quiet. Get in, get the professor, and get out. Any questions? Lucian glanced around at the assembled mutants, face to face with his new comrades, galvanized by the urgency of their mission. He nodded. None. Let's bring him home. With that, the team climbed into the fighter's cockpit. The hatch sealed, and the engines roared to life. On Hank's mark, the jet taxied toward the hidden runway, its afterburners igniting in a thunderous burst. In minutes, they'd be airborne, racing against time to rescue the man who had taught them what it meant to be X-Men. Lucian nodded in agreement with Professor X's guiding principle. Be kind to humans and live in peace with them, but never let down your guard. That balance, he believed, was essential to keep the Xavier Institute safe, ready to stand and fight or to flee at a moment's notice. Follow the arrow, he said. It will lead us straight to the headmaster. Once aboard the fighter jet, Lucian raised his hand and summoned a golden arrow that floated before the cockpit, pointing the way through New York's skyline. As the aircraft lifted off, Professor X's voice echoed telepathically in every mind aboard. Listen, humans and mutants alike. You have lost your direction, but I have returned. The final judgment is upon you and all the edifices you have built. Half a world away, on a rugged hillside outside Cairo, Apocalypse stood over a bound Professor X, forcing him to broadcast this ominous declaration to the entire planet. Lucian watched from a distance, his expression calm as the last words of war rang out across the airwaves. With the warning delivered, Apocalypse turned his attention to the city below, unleashing his terrible powers upon the ancient streets of Cairo. All across Cairo, every building, glass towers, sandstone tenements, even the ancient mud-brick homes, seemed to dissolve in midair. The debris reassembled itself, grain by grain, into the form of a colossal pyramid. Apocalypse needed vast amounts of energy to complete his reincarnation ritual, and this solar-collecting structure would focus the desert sun into a single, searing beam powerful enough to bring him back. As the last stone slid into place, Professor Charles Xavier turned to Lucian, still disguised in Magneto's armor, and asked in a quiet but urgent voice, "Do you really intend to help him slaughter untold millions? Are you prepared to witness the destruction of the world?" Lucian's steel-blue eyes met Xavier's. "I have no choice," he said aloud. But in the sanctuary of Xavier's mind, Lucian sent another message. "Of course I refuse to let this happen. Don't panic. Play along." At that moment, Xavier's brow furrowed as he registered the foreign thought. He shook his head, as if clearing away an echo. "Who are you?" he demanded silently. "It's me," Lucian answered, blinking as though startled to meet Xavier's gaze. Professor X froze. "Eric," he muttered. "How could you be projecting telepathy? No, you're not Eric Lensher." He hesitated, studying the man before him. "Then who are you if not Magneto?" Lucian took a slow breath. "You're right, I'm not Eric, and I'm certainly no enemy." He lowered his voice so only Xavier could hear. "I adopted his guise to get close to Apocalypse to buy us time." Xavier's expression softened only slightly. "And you believe you have a plan that will eliminate Apocalypse?" "I do," Lucian replied, his eyes hardening, "but it won't be easy." Professor X studied him for a long moment. Finally, he asked, his telepathic voice tinged with concern, "Is it too risky?" Lucian's lips curved in a faint, determined smile. "Risky? Yes. Impossible? Never." Lucian hesitated. He didn't know much about the man posing as Magneto, and he wasn't sure the impersonation would work. Calmly, Lucian said, "Don't worry. I know him well, and I'm certain he can pull it off. Besides, if we resort to brute force, things will only get more dangerous." Professor Xavier nodded. In their current predicament, bluffing was their best option. "Very well," Xavier agreed. "We'll follow your plan. I'm with you." 30 minutes later, as the pyramid for Apocalypse's reincarnation neared completion, a supersonic fighter jet appeared over Cairo's skyline. Lucian's astral projection had already neutralized Stryker at Skull Island, and Mystique, evading capture, had flown straight to Cairo aboard the jet, saving them critical hours. In the original timeline, Xavier's ritual would have been halfway done by the time the team arrived. Now, thanks to their swift infiltration, the pyramid still stood unfinished, but every ally was on site, just as Xavier had intended. "It seems we have some uninvited guests eager to join the party," said Archangel, raising his gleaming metal wings. He pointed toward the rapidly approaching fighter jet. All eyes turned skyward, ready for whatever, or whoever, was coming next. Lucian stood confidently, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. In his mind, he taunted his opponents. They're all amateurs, completely oblivious to what it means to live or to die. Quietly, he reached out telepathically to Professor X and the others aboard the jet. "Your Majesty, don't worry. Keep working on the pyramid. We'll handle this intrusion." Then, with chilling composure, he added, "Take them alive. I want the world to know who truly rules." Apocalypse gave a single, approving nod and bent back over his work, meticulously assembling the Pyramid of Rebirth. With the four horsemen now supercharged, and Magneto restored to, if not surpassing, his former peak, no mutant on Earth could match their combined might. The supersonic jet touched down on the windswept plateau. 6 figures in sleek black X-suits disembarked. Beast's hulking frame, Mystique's fluid form, Quicksilver's barely restrained restlessness, Cyclops' unblinking optic visor, Havok's crackling aura, and Phoenix's simmering flame. Lucy, however, did not materialize. In astral form, he hovered just out of sight. Mora, vulnerable and powerless against such foes, remained below deck alongside Nightcrawler, who, for now, waited patiently for the perfect moment to rescue Professor X. On the empty stretch of desert, the two forces faced one another in tense silence. Then, without warning, power erupted in a cacophony of energy and fury, and the battle began. Chapter text. The battlefield crackled with energy as the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse clashed with the 6 X-Men. Lightning-bright power blasts, psionic waves, and razor-sharp blades cut through the dusty air in a chaotic dance of attack and counterattack. For a moment, it was impossible to say who held the upper hand. On the X-Men's side, Quicksilver's superhuman speed and Nightcrawler's teleportation kept their opponents off balance, while Professor Xavier coordinated their tactics via telepathy. But Apocalypse's forces proved relentless. And deep within the melee, Lucian, masquerading flawlessly as Magneto, wielded magnetic forces with terrifying precision. Even when he deliberately held back some of his power, he managed to erect an electromagnetic barrier that trapped Quicksilver in place like a bird in a cage. Apocalypse witnessed the catch through his helm's view lenses and allowed himself a cruel smile. The X-Men were faltering. Sensing total victory, he signaled his horsemen to stand down from full engagement and diverted his focus back to the massive stone edifice rising behind him, the Reincarnation Pyramid. In just 3 or 4 minutes, he could complete its final tiers and initiate the resurrection ceremony that would remake him unstoppable. At that critical moment, Nightcrawler sprang into action. With a brief, confident quip, he vanished from the battlefield and reappeared inside Apocalypse's supersonic warjet, barely 10 yards from Professor Xavier's immobilized profile. In an instant, he seized Xavier's arm and teleported them both back to the speeding aircraft's cockpit, their forms flickering from view in a swirl of indigo smoke. From his vantage point atop the pyramid, Apocalypse's eyes widened. The target of his ritual, the mind of Charles Xavier, was slipping through his grasp. He raised a fist, calling out to his horsemen to halt construction once more, but then he heard Lucian's calm, assured voice crackling through his comm unit. "Don't stop now," Lucian said. "I've got this under control." Apocalypse paused, uncertainty flickering across his ancient features. Lucian's tone was so steady, so absolutely confident, that the warlord's resolve re-solidified. With a single nod, he turned back to the massive stones of the pyramid, his gauntleted hands poised to complete the final, world-shaking ritual. And so the two sides braced themselves, Apocalypse and his horsemen racing to finish the Reincarnation Pyramid, and the X-Men regrouping for a desperate counterstrike. In those suspended seconds, the fate of Charles Xavier, and perhaps the entire mutant race, hung in the balance. "Your Majesty, trust me. They won't get away." Lucian snatched the control stick of the supersonic fighter on the verge of takeoff, cradling it effortlessly in one hand as he vaulted into the cockpit. In an instant, the jet thundered down the runway and launched into the sky. Moments later, Lucian had closed the distance to the fleeing enemy craft, slamming his fighter into its side with brutal precision and cutting off any hope of escape. Chapter 591, Swallowing the Apocalypse, Second Update. Initiate Phase 2. Lucian stepped into the supersonic jet without drawing a weapon. His eyes locked onto Professor X, and in an instant his form shimmered, shifting from the Wansi King's garb into the unmistakable figure of Charles Xavier himself. Moira and Nightcrawler stood frozen, mouths agape, convinced Xavier had suddenly changed shape. Lucian held the illusion only long enough to reach into the miniature dimension he'd created and pluck the real Magneto back into the cockpit. "Eric," Lucian said, keeping his voice low and steady, "you know what to do. Don't let them overwhelm us. Hold your power until I give the signal." Eric's eyes glistened with gratitude. "You saved my wife and daughter," he replied. "I'll give you everything I've got." At Lucian's unspoken command, Eric's battle regalia flared into being. In moments he was clad in dark, edged armor, the fourth horseman of Apocalypse reborn. He seized Lucian, still masquerading as Xavier, by the shoulder, offered a sharp nod to the actual Professor X, and rocketed out of the jet. With pinpoint precision, he deposited Lucian beside Apocalypse's massive form on the battlefield and then dove back into the fray. Below them, the circle of sorceresses Professor X had warned about was weaving arcane patterns in the air. Their focus cracked under pressure, and with a low, metallic roar, Magneto slammed his iron cage into place around them. The clanging bars sealed shut, trapping the mages and cutting off their escape. Now, with the real Xavier safe, Magneto at his side, and Eric unleashed as a horseman, Lucian prepared to swallow the Apocalypse whole. "He got away, but the others have all been captured," came the report from the summit of the Reincarnation Pyramid. King Xiang of Wanji glanced up from the data slate and offered a curt nod. Lord Tianqi, unmoved, simply commanded, "Remain by the pyramid. My revival ritual must not be interrupted." Right now, nothing else mattered to Tianqi except completing this ceremony and seizing Professor X's telepathic gift. With that power, he could bend every mind on Earth to his will. No mutant could flee his influence. Should one even attempt escape, Tianqi would reopen the spatial gate and drag them back. Apocalypse motioned, and Huangsha stepped forward, clutching Lucian firmly. A rippling portal opened at the pyramid's base, and in a heartbeat, they were at the golden-hued reincarnation table set in the chamber's center. They strapped Lucian onto the platform, binding his arms and legs with reinforced bands. Apocalypse grasped a crystalline lever overhead and pulled. Instantly, shafts of sunlight funneled into the pyramid's apex, igniting ancient runes carved into the walls. In response, the central table shuddered. Slender filaments of molten gold unfurled from its edges, weaving through the air until they anchored onto Lucian's restraints. Through this luminous web, Apocalypse's own spiritual essence began its relentless flow into Lucian's form. The chamber hummed with raw energy as the rebirth ritual surged forward, sealing Lucian's fate, and cementing Tianqi's path to unchallenged dominion. Lucian let out a long breath, and finally allowed himself a rare, bright smile. After all his careful planning, he had succeeded in drawing the soul of the Apocalypse into his own body. Convincing Tianqi to initiate the reincarnation ceremony had been the hardest part. If Tianqi had refused the ritual, Lucian never would have gained the power to vanquish the Apocalypse. But, now that the ceremony was underway, the rest would be easy. "Soul, return." With those words, Lucian reached deep into his mind and activated the psychic lattice, connecting him to his 8 avatars. One by one, their scattered spirits flooded back into him. He could feel his mental strength swelling, surging beyond even the heavenly and universe rank he'd once thought unassailable. In that instant, Lucian realized he could obliterate the Apocalypse's soul and claim its power for the price of a fleeting thou, HT, yet he restrained himself. The reincarnation ceremony was not yet complete. He still lacked the full gift of enlightenment. So, instead of unleashing his newfound might, Lucian forged a hidden enclave within his spiritual realm, a compact, veiled domain whose power mirrored the legendary strength of Professor X's Cerebro. There it would lie in wait, ready for him to claim once the ritual reached its final stages. Lucian drew the raging conflict into the pocket spirit realm he'd prepared, erecting barrier wards to blunt the Apocalypse's assault. Trapped inside this private dimension, the dark entity hurled itself against what it believed were Professor X's defenses, unaware that it was battling Lucian's construct. Tianqi watched in awe and relief as the malevolent force spent itself helplessly against those shimmering wards, unable to interrupt the reincarnation rite. A chilling laugh reverberated through the compressed landscape. "Give it up," the Apocalypse taunted. You cannot defeat me. Every moment you resist only fuels my power. Soon you'll be mine to devour. At the heart of Lucian's inner sanctum towered a 10-meter spire of condensed spiritual energy, its surface alive with glowing runes of enlightenment. Crushed beneath the entity's iron heel lay the spectral form of Professor X, Lucian's magical doppelganger, its phantom flesh rent and torn. With savage precision, the apocalypse shredded the illusion apart, siphoning each scrap of psi energy into its abyssal core. With every fragment absorbed, its soul grew stronger, driving the ritual to its climax. When the final wisp of Professor X's spirit collapsed into the void, the apocalypse roared its triumph. It's done. This vessel is mine. Dark energies writhed and coalesced, weaving flesh and essence into a brand new body. The reincarnation ceremony had reached its end. The apocalypse stood reborn, more potent than ever, ready to break free of Lucian's trap and unleash devastation upon the world. Lucian had just shattered the small inner world that had confined his spirit when he braced himself to return to his body, only to discover he hadn't awakened in the same plane at all, but in a far grander spiritual realm. "What on earth?" he whispered, eyes scanning the boundless expanse. He'd never before sensed a spirit world so vast, so overwhelming. His astonishment turned to alarm when a colossal shadow swept overhead. Looking up, he realized an immense entity had materialized behind him. To this behemoth, Lucian himself now looked no larger than a thumb. There's no way a spirit body this powerful could exist here. Impossible, he thought, his heart pounding. When he dueled Professor X, the gap between them had felt like an adult sparring with a child. Now the disparity was more akin to a mountain crushing an insect. A deep, resonant voice rumbled through the ether. "You needn't comprehend it. Soon, you will die." Lucian's eyes hardened. He didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he raised his boot and stamped down onto the Titan's spiritual form. Then, with a mighty inhalation, he yanked every last fragment of its essence into his dantian, sealing them away. Silence fell across the vast realm, broken only by the faint, triumphant pulse of power growing within Lucian's core. Lucian had mastered every conceivable soul technique, dual-wielding magic, soul seals, soul absorption, an arsenal so vast that even Apocalypse's spirit form stood no chance against him. As he consumed Apocalypse's essence, Lucian felt a surge of change within. His X gene multiplied and grew stronger by the second, and dozens of fractured powers, among them the very ability Apocalypse had used to amplify mutant genes, wove themselves seamlessly into his being. Done. He rose from the reincarnation platform and gently returned the soul energies of his various clones to their rightful places. Turning his head, he watched the corpse of Apocalypse collapse into a pool of black ash, dissipating on the wind. Despite performing the full ritual of assimilation, Lucian's own appearance was untouched. No gaunt blue skin, no bald skull. His vitality had always eclipsed Apocalypse's, so there was no risk of his identity being overwritten. In a single, flawless act, Lucian had absorbed all of Apocalypse's power and soul without sacrificing an ounce of himself. Lucian rose into the air and slipped out of the shattered pyramid, scanning the battlefield below. Storm lay unconscious on one side, Angel's broken wings splayed uselessly, and Psylocke was slumped against the rubble, each fully subdued. It was hardly surprising. Even a single ally like Magneto or Quicksilver could have overwhelmed these three so-called horsemen. In truth, apart from Magneto himself, Apocalypse's chosen champions had proven disappointingly weak. He hovered for a moment, then drifted back toward the gathered X-Men. Professor Xavier, Magneto, and the others watched him expectantly. Lucian allowed himself a satisfied smile before announcing, "It's over. Apocalypse is dead." At his words, tension drained from every face. A collective sigh of relief rose among the heroes. The threat had finally been vanquished. "Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like rewritten? Once I have the content, I'll revise it into coherent, idiomatic English with Lucian as the main character." Chapter 592, Lucian's Suggestion. Restored to its former glory, Lucian beamed as the power of Apocalypse surged through him. With a graceful sweep of his hand, the shattered ruins of Cairo assembled themselves, walls mended, tombs resealed, and dust settling as if the devastation had never occurred. He closed his eyes, feeling the difference. Psychic strength enhanced, spellcasting effortless. Rebuilding an entire city once strained his focus. Now it felt like conjuring a spark. A chorus of gasps rose behind him. The X-Men, summoned by Professor Xavier to investigate the disturbance, had only moments ago seen Lucian slip into a new guise, hiding his true form. They'd been in on the ruse, awaiting Xavier's telepathic cue, but nothing could have prepared them for this display of raw power. "Oh my God," breathed Storm, wind whipping at her cloak. "Unbelievable," muttered Colossus, his metallic arms crossing over an open mouth. Lucian met their stunned expressions, then exchanged a knowing glance with the figure standing beside him, his original body, recently projected into reality. With barely a movement, he wove a discreet spatial charm. In a shimmer of light, the two forms swapped places, the illusion dissolving as Lucian assumed his hidden identity once more. Silence fell. The demonstration was complete. Now, with his power proven and Apocalypse dismantled within the pyramid, Lucian was ready to share his plans and his suggestions with the astonished X-Men. Lucian stood behind the assembled X-Men, his true form, while at the pyramid's exit, his projected thought body lingered, drawing attention away from the real him. He'd done this deliberately. Such a dramatic display was bound to alert the Time Administration, and if they were going to meddle in the timeline, they needed to stay one step ahead. "Thank you for saving us," Professor Charles Xavier said, settling back into his wheelchair. Lucian watched him with mild amusement, as Charles had just psychically conferred with Eric Lenscher, Magneto, and learned that Lucian had rescued Eric's wife and daughter. From what he'd gathered, Lucian's true motive was to wrest Apocalypse's power for himself, but regardless of his reasons, he had saved them, and in doing so had even restored Cairo to its proper state. Not exactly the work of a villain. Lucian offered the professor a wry smile. "Don't thank me. I have my own agenda. I helped because you're friends of mine from another universe." Charles frowned, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Then his gaze sharpened, pupils widening. "Another universe?" Lucian folded his arms, the faint glow of residual energy humming around him. As the X-Men exchanged curious looks, Professor Xavier leaned forward, eager to understand, because this was a revelation that could change everything. Lucian braced his legs against the wheels and pushed himself upright. To his relief, the pain was gone, and none of Hank's potion's side effects remained. His telepathy still hummed at the edge of his consciousness. A slow grin spread across his face. "All right," he whispered. "Time to go home." He glanced over at Professor Xavier, whose legs now moved freely, and at Magneto's wife and daughter, both kneeling in stunned gratitude. Lucian took a deep breath and began to etch the portal's shimmering outline in midair. As its edges flared to life, he reached out with his mind and sent a final message to Charles and Eric. Ice-cold images of his own world flickered behind their eyes. Cities leveled, mutant kind hunted to the brink of extinction. Lucian's voice echoed in their thoughts. "This is what happens when mutants and humans fall into the same old traps. Either you exterminate one another or you grovel in search of approval. Neither path ends well. You won't win by begging for mercy, but you won't survive by burning the world down either. Find the balance. Show humanity that you're strong enough to defend yourselves, and they will retreat. But if you cower, they'll keep pushing until there's nothing left of you." He paused, letting the war gnawing sink in, then turned back to the portal. Its surface rippled like liquid silver. "I'll be seeing you, if there's anything left of your world by then." With that, he stepped through the threshold and vanished. On the other side, the air crackled with possibility. Lucian's mission was finished, but the real challenge lay just ahead, returning home and ensuring his own universe didn't repeat the same mistakes. "I'm just offering a suggestion." With that, Lucian stepped through the spatial portal and reappeared in his native Marvel universe amid a swirl of light. In that world, Professor X and Magneto stand at opposite extremes. Xavier, ever the optimist, places too much faith in human nature. Magneto, ever the pessimist, views humanity with unbridled suspicion. Both agree on one thing: mutants and humans can never truly coexist. They see the world as a place where villains will always exist, and genuinely kind human leaders are few and far between. No matter how many disasters Professor X has averted or how many crises his team has resolved, the human power structure will never ignore the immense threat mutants could pose. From an ordinary human's perspective, It's not wrong to fear such power, even if Xavier himself is benevolent. And if Xavier were to fall, who's to say the next mutant leader wouldn't be driven by hatred, like Magneto or Apocalypse? Lucian knew that his Academy of Superhumans didn't earn peace with humanity simply through its roster of headline-making rescues. The true foundation of coexistence lay elsewhere, even subtler and far more enduring. Lucian's power is absolute, so absolute, in fact, that no human leader dares even imagine turning against him. They know that the moment they entertain treacherous thoughts, Lucian will erase them from existence, without so much as a burial marker. Popular acclaim for superheroes means nothing when those in authority decide to wield the media like a weapon. Today's celebrated champion can be tomorrow's public enemy. This unshakable fear is precisely why the ruling elite won't risk provoking Lucian. But Magneto's alternative is no better. Exterminate all humans and leave only mutants? That isn't a solution. It's a recipe for new conflicts. Mutants, after all, are human too, with the same capacity for greed, ambition, and betrayal. They will jockey for power, forge secret alliances, and undermine one another. And what about the children born to two mutants who turn out to be ordinary? Do they get executed for their lack of powers? What justice is there in that? Moreover, many mutants still love and are loved by their human families. Slaughtering those families would only sow seeds of vengeance and blood debts that could haunt mutant kind for generations. Lucian believes there is a better path. He urges Professor Xavier and Magneto to set aside their differences and work together, not to dominate or annihilate, but to establish a sovereign refuge where mutants can live, learn, and govern themselves free from fear, suspicion, and the ever-looming threat of genocide. In that united front lies their best hope for peace. Once Professor X activated the brainwave amplifier, he gained the power to seize, and even extinguish, the will of every ordinary human on Earth in an instant. No deterrent in history, not even nuclear weapons, could rival such absolute control. The world's leaders quickly realized this. Any nation that dared oppose the mutant empire would face immediate annihilation. As a result, no government today will risk confronting mutants. Those without nuclear arsenals would never challenge a rival who possesses them, and even nuclear-armed states hesitate, knowing Magneto can neutralize nearly all of humanity's warheads with a gesture of his hand. United by fear and rivalries, human nations are hopelessly divided and powerless against the combined might of Charles Xavier and Eric Landshere. Together, their grip on the Earth is unshakable. Lucian has entrusted the amplifier to Xavier and Magneto. Whether they choose to follow his counsel is their own affair. If they do, Lucian, concealed within Xavier's form, will lend covert support, even tapping into Apocalypse's power to bolster their forces. If they refuse, he won't lose any sleep over it. Just keep a low profile while watching over the Phoenix Host and the Scarlet Witch, Lucian whispered to his operatives. Don't let the Time Management Bureau catch wind of us. Gradually feed on the Phoenix's fire and the Scarlet Witch's chaos magic. Once we've absorbed enough power, we'll slip into other parallel worlds and expand our influence. With that, Lucian vanished. Professor X and Magneto exchanged a long look before speaking in unison. I think it's time we had a serious discussion. The visions that had just flooded their minds still fluttered at the edges of their thoughts, fragments of raw, unfiltered power and unsettling revelations that shattered everything they'd believed about humankind. As the weight of those images settled in, both men realized their world had irrevocably changed. Chapter 593, Communication Among the Wise, Part 2. Shortly after Lucian's astral self reformed in the floating city of the Superpower Academy, a shimmering time gate opened before him. Through it stepped an elderly man nearly 60 years of age, Master Fake, the Time Administration's overseer for this sector. Mr. Lucian, Fake began with a calm smile. We warned you before. Unrestrained travel through the multiverse breeds chaos. Despite his words, Fake made no move to detain Lucian. His tone was cordial, almost deferential. He had good reason to be. Though the Time Administration drafted the laws, Fake knew he couldn't compel Lucian's compliance. Lucian's power hovered on the brink of the dimensional demon's might. Even if they severed an entire universe to halt him, Lucian would simply slip free. Fake preferred diplomacy over force. If anyone could argue appeasement better than he could, he'd never have risen to his rank. Standing in that luminescent cityscape, he laid out the administration's concerns and incentives with the practiced grace of a seasoned negotiator, hoping to steer Lucian toward cooperation rather than confrontation. Lucian studied Old Fake over the rim of his teacup, letting the steam curl between them. If our opponents truly mean to defy the Time Management Bureau and wreak havoc across multiple universes, he said, then they've picked a dangerous fight. We aren't defenseless, and we do have weapons capable of harming even dimensional demons. Old Fake nodded, unfazed. Of course. Please, sit. Let's have some tea and talk this through. Lucian pulled out a chair for his guest and waved to a nearby attendant. As fresh porcelain cups appeared, he poured the pale liquor with a steady hand. He settled into his own seat and took a slow, measured sip. When the attendant departed, Lucian let the cup rest on the table and sighed. Old Fake leaned forward, hands clasped. So, what's on your mind? Lucian cupped his teacup, thumb tracing the rim. You remember how I sent everyone stranded in the void back to their native universes? Old Fake smiled faintly. I do. The council even approved it. Those people had been laid off under the old regulations. With the new management rules in place, we won't be dismissing anyone without good reason. Lucian nodded. Exactly. I wanted to make sure the Bureau's position was clear, and that we're all working from the same page. He paused, letting the weight of it settle between them. Because if they're pushing this hard, we'll need every ally we can get. Even if you refuse to send them back, Old Fake warned, we'll retrieve them one by one ourselves. Lucian's expression darkened with regret. The truth is, there was an accident in the universe I just visited. That universe. It was almost identical to ours, like a mirror image twin. I realized that if it continued unchecked, it would suffer the same desolation ours has endured. I couldn't stand by and watch it collapse. He paused, his voice heavy with remorse. I let my compassion get the better of me, but rest assured, Old Fake, this time was a one-off. It won't happen again. Old Fake's lip twitched in a half-smile, though his eyes remained skeptical. Is that so? He said, waving a dismissive hand. I'm supposed to believe you're just following orders from our superiors? Some routine mission? I swear I am, Lucian replied earnestly. You have my word. When I return, I'll explain everything to High Command. Old Fake straightened, masking his doubt behind a casual shrug. In the end, Lucian had caused no lasting harm. He hadn't destroyed that universe or slain anyone. Even Apocalypse's death had been self-inflicted, born of his own ambition to usurp another's body. Lucian had merely acted out of pity. That, Old Fake conceded silently, was a mistake he could forgive. As long as you promise it won't happen again, Lucian said calmly, then this mission can be considered complete. Old Fake let out a relieved breath, the tension draining from his shoulders. Thank you, Lucian. If anything troublesome arises in my jurisdiction, I'll come to you first. Lucian rose and gave Old Fake a friendly pat on the shoulder as they stepped down from the platform together. Both men were sharp-minded, so reaching a peaceful agreement had been surprisingly straightforward. It was always the stubborn types, those who refused to explain themselves, that caused the real headaches. Old Fake's eyes lit up. I dread dealing with those cases. Your help would be priceless. Lucian nodded. When Old Fake first arrived, his only hope had been to resolve this matter quietly, without incurring Lucian's displeasure. Not only had he achieved that, but he'd also gained an extraordinary ally. With Lucian's strength at his disposal, every thorny problem, no matter how far-flung, could now be handled swiftly. A weight lifted from Old Fake's mind. He would never again lose sleep over what might go wrong. Lucian watched with a small smile as Old Fake strolled back into the Time Management Bureau, clearly pleased with their discussion. Admittedly, running errands for the Bureau cost him valuable hours he could have spent honing his magic. But cultivating Old Fake's favor was worth every lost minute. Having his patron's tacit approval meant many minor breaches would be quietly overlooked, saving Lucian untold headaches down the road. His counterpart in the other universe wasn't so fortunate. No matter how deftly he siphoned Phoenix and Chaos energies, such profound distortions inevitably leave ripples in time. Eventually, the Bureau's time management machine would pick up the anomalies, framing one clue after another until the truth emerged. Yet because Lucian had proven himself useful, helping Old Fake deal with particularly thorny cases, the Elder had spent centuries tracing those very clues back to him, only to bury the evidence instead of sounding the alarm. As long as Lucian kept his meddling to a minimum, he could continue his studies and his secret conquests of power without worrying about being exposed. He didn't mind the detour. Helping Old Fake rein in dangerous figures across the multiverse might have delayed Lucian's own agenda, but it also opened up new coordinates in the Marvel Universe, and even yielded a few unexpected rewards. Now, in another reality, Cairo, Egypt, his latest mission was complete. Aboard a sleek, supersonic jet bound for Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, Lucian watched the desert sky fade into high-altitude blue. Below deck, the three horsemen of apocalypse lay securely restrained, their ominous presence a reminder of how close the world had come to ruin. Across the cabin, Charles Xavier regarded him with a warm, welcoming smile. Free of his wheelchair, Charles stood tall and serene. "Welcome to our school, Lucian," he said, extending a hand. "And thank you for everything you've done." To Xavier and Magneto, Lucian was nothing more than the new teacher who'd arrived to apply for a position. No one suspected that this mild-mannered stranger was in fact a mutant from another universe, and the very one who had slain Apocalypse. As they shook hands, Charles allowed his telepathy to brush Lucian's mind. He would never violate a student's privacy, but a brief, superficial scan helped him gather basic background, age, origins, abilities, and judge whether Lucian could be trusted. Within moments, the professor withdrew, satisfied with what he had learned. Lucian nodded and settled into his seat. The jet's engines hummed, carrying them steadily north. Ahead lay the quiet grounds of Xavier's School, a place of refuge for mutants, where, he hoped, he might finally find the answers he sought. Professor X paused, focusing his telepathy on the newcomer. He wanted to learn Lucian's name and age, and, more importantly, whether this mutant harbored any ill intent toward him or the school. After all, Xavier's goal was to keep anyone with corrupt ambitions off the faculty, safeguarding his students from harmful influences. Yet the instant his mind probed Lucian's consciousness, it ran up against an invisible barrier. Professor X recoiled slightly, surprised. "You have psychic powers too?" he asked. Lucian's lips curved into a modest grin. "Yes, I mentioned I have several abilities, psychic reading among them. But don't worry, Professor, I'm no match for you." Chapter 594, Devouring the Power of the Phoenix, one update. Lucian stood in Professor Xavier's office, his posture relaxed but his expression guarded. The old man watched him with genuine curiosity and a hint of admiration. "You have so many abilities," Professor X said, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "Why do you want to join our school? With your talents, you could earn a fortune, and surely you're not in need of money." Lucian shrugged, his dark eyes flicking away. "I'm not short on money," he admitted quietly, "but I'm short on people who won't call me a freak." At that word, Professor X's features softened. He closed the gap between them and offered Lucian a reassuring smile. "Here, no one will treat you like a freak. This place is more than just a school, it's a family. You'll belong." The label freak haunted every mutant. No matter how extraordinary their power, telepathy, flight, metal manipulation, ordinary people saw only something unnatural, something to fear. Many of the school's current students had arrived on Xavier's doorstep after running away from homes and towns that rejected them. Professor X rested a kindly hand on Lucian's shoulder. "When they call you a freak, remember it's their own jealousy and fear talking. Your abilities are a gift. Never let anyone make you feel inferior because of them." Before Lucian could reply, the door opened quietly. Magneto, returning from comforting his wife and daughter in the next room, stepped inside. His powerful presence filled the office, and he offered Lucian a nod of welcome. "Charles is right," Magneto said in his calm, resonant voice. "Here, you'll find acceptance. We've all been where you are." Lucian met Magneto's gaze and allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. For the first time in a long while, he felt he might have found a place to call home. Lucian stepped aside, watching the two old friends square off across the chessboard. Professor Charles Xavier offered a warm smile to his counterpart. "Eric, we're in agreement on this," Charles said quietly. "At least on this point. Beyond our differing views of humanity, we share the same goal, ensuring a better future for mutants." Magneto, Eric, nodded, then glanced at Lucian. I hear your power can change anything. Could you give us a little help with our game? Certainly. With a graceful motion of his hand, Lucian caused an extra chess piece to materialize before them. Magneto raised an eyebrow. A most convenient ability. Then, glancing at Charles, he added, just so we're clear, no mind reading. Charles chuckled. No need. I'll let you take the first move. He reached for a pawn. In response, Eric summoned a faint wave of magnetism that shifted one of Charles's rooks into position. He leaned back with a self-satisfied smirk. Better this way. Fair for both of us. Charles inspected the altered board. Those are two lackluster pieces, he observed dryly. Lucian shook his head, smiling to himself. He'd expected a display of grandmaster tactics, but the play felt uninspired and clumsy. High IQ didn't guarantee a brilliant game, and a skillful player didn't necessarily boast a genius mind. Lucian shrugged and walked away, leaving the two friends to their friendly, if imperfect, match. Everyone here loves a good chess match, especially when the other player is as obsessed with the game as they are. Do you know why I never join in? The demon-shaped woman asked Lucian with a grin as he approached. He shrugged, and she chuckled. I'm afraid I'll get too competitive and knock the pieces over, so I prefer to just watch. For her, it had been decades since she'd seen these two rivals so relaxed and happy across the board. The last time was back in 1962, during their training at Charles Xavier's Manor, what's now the Xavier Institute, when they united to face the threat of the Black Emperor. Those two had grown up relying only on themselves, taking each other on as siblings in all but blood, while she stood by to help them rebuild their confidence. Together with their teachers and loved ones, they'd learned to fight not just foes, but their own doubts. They were the people she cherished more than anyone else in the world. All right, Lucian said with a warm smile. He hadn't expected that answer, but it suited her perfectly. He settled beside Kuai-Yin and noticed her gaze drifting toward Magneto. Raising an eyebrow, he teased, So, when are you going to tell him? Kuai-Yin hesitated, her eyes flicking between Magneto and the small family he'd brought with him, his wife and daughter, standing just behind their father. I haven't figured out the right moment yet, she admitted softly. I want it to be perfect. Lucian leaned forward. There's never a perfect moment for this kind of talk. Might as well get it out now. Kuai-Yin nodded. All right, I'll tell you once we're at school. With that settled in his mind, Kuai-Yin shifted the subject back to Wanda. So, what's your sister doing these days? She's teaching at an elementary school, Lucian explained. Funny thing, she always dreamed of becoming a sitcom actress. Her favorite show growing up was The Dick Van Dyke Show. At the mention of Wanda's acting ambitions, Kuai-Yin brightened. That makes sense. She never wanted the kind of spotlight an actor gets, too much exposure. In the classroom, even if a child blurts something out, no one takes it seriously. And she genuinely loves working with kids. Their conversation drifted back and forth for the rest of the flight, and before they knew it, the supersonic jet was touching down at Mutants Academy. Night had already fallen by the time everyone made their way to their rooms. When the dormitory corridors quieted and the other students drifted off to sleep, Lucian slipped out of his bed and crept down the hall to Chin's room. He paused outside her door. Through the crack of it, he could see her tossing beneath the covers, her brow furrowed as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Lucian took a steadying breath and gently pushed the door open. As Chin's emotions surged, a terrible force awakened within her, coalescing into the fiery form of a phoenix. Realizing the power threatened to burst free, she clenched her fists, struggling to suppress the rising energy. Lucian pressed his palm gently to her forehead, summoning all his strength into the Liu Ku Immortal Thief technique. Tendrils of spiritual energy streamed from him, attempting to draw out the phoenix's power and absorb it into himself. At first, the process seemed to work, but moments later, Lucian's brow creased in frustration. It's resisting me, so much more than I expected. He understood that at his current level, he couldn't pull the entire Phoenix Force from Chin in one go. His original plan had been to take it slowly, siphon off a little each night, and complete the task in a few months. But now it was clear that this energy was far more stubborn. At the present rate, it would take at least 20 years to fully extract and refine it. This can't be right, he muttered to himself. No matter how potent the Phoenix power, it shouldn't be this difficult to refine. Still pressing on, Lucian redoubled his focus, determined to find a way to overcome the resistance, or at least to improve his technique, before Qin's body could be overwhelmed by the Phoenix force. Lucian stared at the swirling ember of Phoenix power in his palm. Compared to Qin's might, this fragment was barely a spark. Yet no matter how he fed it into the 6-coup immortal thief, it fought back, because it wasn't only the Phoenix energy itself resisting his devouring and refinement, but Qin's own subconscious will. As the destined host of the Phoenix power in every reality, Qin's inner vigilance amplified the fragment's defense. Lucian weighed his options. He could spend weeks upgrading the 6-coup immortal thief to vastly increase its absorption potency, or he could find some way to break through Qin's mental barriers, win his trust so that Qin let down his guard and stopped counteracting the process. He smirked. Why not both? That night, Lucian unleashed the full, lie-enhanced 6-coup immortal thief and worked through the darkness, relentlessly siphoning Phoenix embers into himself. By dawn, the last glow had been consumed, and Qin was stirring. With a crackle of spatial energy, Lucian vanished from the ritual chamber and reappeared inside Qin's dormitory. As a teacher at the academy and Qin's mentor, Lucian knew how easily he could pry open Qin's heart. If he played his cards right, the next step would be effortless. Lucian was confident that, with enough time spent communing with the immortal threads, no major obstacle would stand in his way. He had no desire to seize the Phoenix's power for himself. What truly interested him was fortifying the 6-line immortal thieves technique. He'd already devised a plan for that. Given his current cultivation, facing down the black dragon posed little real threat. The dragon's unique gift was the ability to devour any form of power, but that weakness could be turned against it. If Lucian could slay the beast and absorb both its dragon crystal and the residual essence within its lair, the devouring aptitude of the 6-line immortal thieves would skyrocket to a whole new level. Chapter 595, Spiritual Tutor Lucian, Second Update. Even a small amount of this power is surprisingly pure. Back in his room, Lucian let out a satisfied sigh. He hadn't absorbed a vast reserve of the Phoenix's energy overnight, yet the refining effect was remarkable. He was certain that if he could distill every last trace of the Phoenix power from Qin's body, even without touching Wanda's chaotic energy, he would easily ascend to the single-body universe level. The quality of this energy was simply unparalleled. The next morning, at 7 o'clock, Lucian had just finished breakfast in the school cafeteria when Professor X slipped into the seat across from him. Lucian, Professor X began, right now the school only has 2 instructors, Hank and me, so we're covering a lot of classes. Which subjects do you feel most confident teaching? The mutant school had been established soon after the main academy opened, then placed under military authority and closed to outsiders for years. As a result, none of its students had yet grown into teaching roles. To this day, only Professor X and the Wild Beast served on the faculty. At first, the 2 veteran instructors were true polymaths, equally at ease teaching any subject. When the school opened, they managed admirably despite the crowded classrooms. But as more and more mutants enrolled, their workload became unmanageable. No longer able to cover every course themselves, they'd begun recruiting new teachers to share the load. Lucian faced the interview panel and spoke with quiet confidence. My heightened mental aptitude makes me well-suited to psychological counseling. I majored in psychology at university and upon graduation worked as a licensed psychologist. I'd like to guide our students through their emotional challenges, help them resolve inner conflicts, and serve as a spiritual mentor. Behind his steady gaze, Lucian's mind was already at work on a far more personal agenda. Winning the role of mentor would give him close access to Qin, allowing him to break down Qin's defenses and accelerate his plan to absorb the Phoenix Force. He devised the scheme over breakfast that very morning, and to ensure Professor Xavier never spotted a flaw in his credentials, Lucian had drawn on Apocalypse's powers while Makoto Misaka used electromagnetic hacking to fabricate an impeccable digital record. Lucian's file was flawless, so flawless in fact that even the CIA, the FBI, and every other intelligence agency that ran his background checks failed to spot the forgeries. His dossier included every conceivable detail. His earliest memories, his teenage years, his college transcripts, and even his clinical notes from when he'd begun practicing as a psychologist. Yet none of it was real. Psychic tutor, Professor Xavier murmured, studying the title on the screen. He hesitated. With most instructors, he'd sign off instantly, but psychological education was an entirely different matter. Every child who came through the doors of Xavier's school carried emotional wounds grafted on by their mutant abilities. For some, like Bobby Drake, who struggled to control his ice powers, or Pyro, whose flames reflected a hot temper, half a dozen sessions of empathy and guidance were enough to set them on a healthier course. Then there were more severe cases, like Piano, whose telepathic gift had once driven him to the brink. He required weekly, sometimes daily, counseling just to keep his mind steady. Charles spent countless hours each day in his therapy wing. If Lucian could step into that role, Xavier thought, it would free him to address the growing tensions elsewhere. The Brotherhood's demands, diplomatic overtures, and above all, Magneto's proposal for a mutant nation, which still awaited his considered response. He leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressing together. Accepting Lucian as the school's new psychic tutor could be the relief he needed, if Lucian truly possessed the skills his falsified record claimed. Professor Xavier wasn't entirely comfortable handing over the psychological counseling to Lucian. Such work was too important. If it went wrong, it could irreparably damage a young mutant's mind. Sensing Xavier's hesitation, Lucian leaned forward. In addition to what you know, he said, I have another ability. I can stabilize a mutant's powers. I can help them master their abilities quickly and keep them from ever losing control. Xavier's brow furrowed. Lucian pressed on. Now that he wielded the full extent of Apocalypse's powers, he could push a mutant's potential to its absolute limit and simultaneously ensure that potential remained safely harnessed. You mean you could train a mutant to perfect command of their power in record time? Xavier asked, eyes widening. Lucian nodded. At that, Xavier's expression shifted from skepticism to eager excitement. It was clear why. Society's fear of mutants went beyond the possibility of destructive power. Even well-intentioned mutants often struggled to control their abilities, and that lack of control was what truly set them apart in the public eye. One of the biggest challenges is that mutant powers are fundamentally unstable, and when they flare up, they can pose a grave threat. Very few mutants awaken their abilities at birth. For most, powers lie dormant through infancy and early childhood, only surging to life later, sometimes in elementary school, more often in junior high or even high school. What's more, these awakenings tend to coincide with intense emotional upheaval. A sudden shock or outburst of fear can trigger an uncontrolled surge of power, and in those moments a young mutant can unintentionally harm friends or family. Survivors of such incidents often carry unbearable guilt. If someone is injured, the child blames himself. If someone dies, the psychological scars can last a lifetime. To mitigate this, special schools for mutants offer psychological counseling, tailored training programs, and even technological devices designed to help children master their abilities safely. But despite these supports, many students remain haunted by the fear that their next emotional spike could lead to disaster. If Lucian could develop a way to stabilize a mutant's powers at their source, ensuring that no surge ever runs unchecked, he would not only free countless children from lifelong trauma, but also lift an enormous burden from the schools charged with guiding them. Lucian nodded. I've worked with mutants before, and I believe I can help Scott gain better control over his power. Professor X looked intrigued. Very well. Show us what you can do. Without another word, he led Lucian down the hall to the main classroom. Inside, the students froze in mid-lesson and gathered at the walls. Professor X called, Scott! From behind a row of desks, Scott emerged, his eyes hidden behind ruby quartz glasses. Curiosity rippled through the room as he approached. Lucian, Professor X prompted, whenever you're ready. Lucian stepped forward and placed a steady hand on Scott's head. He closed his eyes and channeled the energy he had absorbed from Apocalypse, carefully weaving it into Scott's unstable optic powers. Seconds later, Lucian withdrew his hand and offered Scott an encouraging smile. All right, go ahead. Take off your glasses. Scott hesitated for only a moment. Then, aiming at the large oak tree outside the window, he slowly removed his glasses. Silence fell. No crimson beam shot from his eyes. He lowered his hands and looked around in astonishment. His eyes were perfectly still, indistinguishable from anyone else's. Professor X's face softened into a proud, relieved smile. Around them, the students erupted in whispered amazement. Lucian simply watched Scott, confident that for the first time in a long while, the young man had real control over his power. Chapter 7. A New Appointment. Lucian watched closely as the young mutant stood alone in the training arena. Shattered wooden targets and fallen leaves bore witness to countless failed attempts. He spoke softly. All right, clear your mind and let the energy flow naturally. The boy set his eyes. A tense stillness fell over the field. Then, in an instant, two brilliant red beams shot from his eyes. They struck the massive oak at the center, slicing its trunk perfectly in half with a thunderous crack. As quickly as they'd appeared, the beams faded, and the boy blinked. He removed his ruby quartz visor, astonished to find his vision unfiltered yet unharmed. I did it, he breathed, voice trembling with excitement. I controlled it, and I didn't even need the glasses. A warm smile crossed Lucian's face. Relief washed over him. You did. Perfectly. The young mutant turned, eyes shining. Thank you, Mr. Lucian. From the raised dais at the edge of the arena, Professor Xavier rose from his seat, watching the display with quiet pride. He stepped forward, then addressed Lucian directly. Lucian, he announced, his tone both firm and congratulatory, effective immediately, you will assume the role of school psychologist. Your duties will include helping our students master their abilities and guiding them through any emotional or psychological challenges. Professor Xavier extended his hand in a formal gesture of partnership. Lucian stood, accepted the handshake, and met the professor's gaze. He understood the weight of this new responsibility and welcomed it. Chapter 600. The Establishment of the Mutant Empire. Once Professor Charles Xavier formally appointed Lucian as the school's psychology professor, Lucian turned his full attention to helping his fellow mutants stabilize their powers. He began one student at a time, first and foremost, Hank McCoy, the Beast. Thanks to Lucian's training and careful guidance, Hank learned to shift seamlessly between his human and blue-furred forms. No drugs required. Lucian was halfway through refining the technique when the school's supersonic jet finally touched down on the landing pad. Under Magneto's careful magnetic guidance, a snarling, foul-mouthed figure disembarked. Wolverine. He strode off the plane, claws sheathed but eyes wary. Charles, Magneto called out, bowing his head. This is the history teacher you requested. I've brought him back safely, though he suffered memory loss. He'll need your telepathic help to recover what he's forgotten. Earlier, Charles had accessed William Stryker's confiscated records and uncovered Logan's forced transformation into Weapon X. Learning that this Wolverine had come from the future to aid their cause, Charles refused to let him remain a prisoner. He'd ordered a covert nighttime raid on Stryker's facility, sending Magneto and Mystique to extract Logan. Not only had they succeeded in rescuing him, but they'd also filled the long-vacant history teacher position at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Now, as Wolverine lopped toward the mansion, Lucian watched with a mix of relief and determination. His work was far from over, but with the X-Men united under one roof, the mutant empire truly had its foundation. Logan, relax. Professor Charles Xavier stepped forward and laid his hand on Wolverine's forehead. Gently, he wove his telepathy into Logan's fractured thoughts, guiding the Berserker's scattered memories back into place. As each fragment returned, the tension in Wolverine's face eased and his breathing steadied. While Xavier and Magneto worked side by side to calm Wolverine's storm of memories, Jean Grey watched from the edge of the clearing. Her heart pounded with desperation. She'd seen what happened the first time her telekinesis spun wildly out of control. An entire city block's worth of cars had been hurled skyward like toys. Even now, under Professor Xavier's tutelage, her powers were only tentatively restrained. Every so often, her energy flared into near-catastrophic waves that threatened to tear the school apart. The other students at Xavier's school for gifted youngsters kept their distance, whispering that she was a danger, a ticking time bomb. But today, she just witnessed something extraordinary. Lucian, the new professor, had effortlessly stabilized Logan's mind. If he could calm a berserker's rage and reassemble his shattered memories, maybe he could help Jean master her unruly power as well. She approached him as he stepped back from Wolverine. "Professor Lucian," she said, voice trembling, "could you help me?" Lucian turned, giving her a kind, unwavering look. "Of course." He reached out and placed his palm lightly against her temple. Jean closed her eyes. At first, she felt a rush of raw energy thrumming under his hand, an echo of her own power, crackling like lightning in her veins. Then, as Lucian concentrated, that energy began to calm, folding in on itself until it settled into a soft, steady hum. She felt her racing pulse slow, the whirl of telekinesis drawing into a single, coherent thread under his guidance. Professor Xavier glanced up from Wolverine and saw Lucian working with Jean. A proud, approving smile spread across his face. Magneto, standing at Xavier's side, gave a small nod, an acknowledgement of Lucian's rare gift. For the first time in a long while, Jean felt hope. With Lucian's help, she thought, she might finally control the power that had always threatened to destroy her and everyone around her, rather than setting it free. Lucian had long recognized that Jean's potential far outstripped even his own and surpassed Magneto's as well. Urali, he valued her highly. If anyone could unravel the mystery of her uncontrollable power, it was him. "Jean, your situation is complicated," he said, adopting a thoughtful frown. Instantly, hope drained from her eyes. "But it's not unsolvable," he added before Jean could speak. Her face brightened again at his reassurance. At that moment, Professor Xavier, who'd been standing nearby, stepped forward. "What's going on, Lucian?" Lucian met the professor's gaze. "I've discovered that there are actually two forces at work inside Jean. One is the energy generated by her mutant gene. I've already helped her stabilize it so she can wield it freely. But there's a second, far more powerful force. It doesn't come from her mutant biology, and she has no control over it." Professor Xavier's expression shifted to one of realization. It explained everything. He'd guided Jean through countless counseling sessions, yet her power continued to surge unpredictably. Now he understood. An outside force was at the root of her turmoil. "Are you saying you can remove it?" Jean's voice quivered with a mix of hope and fear. Lucian nodded. "Yes, I have the ability to dissolve mutant powers, but what's inside you, the Phoenix Force, is exceptionally strong. It could take a long time to purge it completely, and it only works if you're truly willing to let it go." Jean's eyes brightened instantly. "I am. I've been tormented by that power since I was a child. If I can be free of it, even if I lose my abilities entirely, I won't hesitate." "Good," Lucian said, offering her a reassuring smile. "Then you must trust me and remain perfectly calm. The less you resist, the more smoothly I can break down that force. In time, you'll regain control over whatever remains of your abilities, or live as an ordinary person, if that's what you choose." He gently placed his hand on Jean's head. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and nodded. Lucian murmured the words of an incantation. A pale, shimmering energy unfurled around Jean, the glow of the Phoenix Force wavering under his influence. Minutes passed like hours as Lucian maintained his concentration, guiding the power's dissolution. Finally, the brilliant aura dimmed to a soft ember. He opened his eyes, withdrew his hand, and studied Jean's face. "Jean," he said softly, "the process is nearly complete." She brushed a hand across her chest, relief flooding her expression. "I can feel it. It's almost gone." Lucian extended his arm to steady her. "You'll feel lighter every day. With practice, you'll master whatever remains of your gift. And if you choose to walk away from it entirely, you'll do so on your own terms." Jean offered him a grateful smile and took his arm. Lucian gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "This part of the journey is almost over. Now starts the real work of rebuilding yourself without that burden." She lifted her chin, determination in her eyes. "I'm ready." Lucian watched the subtle change in Jean. The more she trusted him, the less her resistance, and the more Phoenix Force he absorbed. With every fragment of that cosmic power, Jean's faith in him deepened, fueling a virtuous circle he was only too happy to exploit. He leaned back, a small smile on his lips. "Next up is Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch." he reminded himself. Never put all your eggs in one basket. Jean's Phoenix Force had already been enough to propel him beyond the cosmic threshold into the single-universe tier of power, but no one could predict how stable that breakthrough would be. Better to secure Scarlet Witch's chaos magic at the same time. He could never have too much strength. That evening, the conference room at the mutant school was filled to capacity. Professor Xavier sat at the head of the long table, flanked on one side by Magneto and Beast, on the other by Havoc, Mystique, and Quicksilver. Wolverine leaned forward on his elbows, and Lucian took his place among the assembled adult mutants. The air crackled with anticipation. Xavier cleared his throat. Eric and I have discussed our future at length, he began, his voice calm but resolute. Tonight, we formalize what our actions have already begun. We are no longer simply a school. We are the mutant empire. A ripple of murmurs ran around the room as each face registered the weight of that announcement. Wolverine offered a low growl of approval. Magneto's eyes gleamed. Lucian allowed himself a private nod. The next phase of their plan was officially underway. We must stand as equals to the human nations, negotiate on the same terms, and stop them from snatching mutants for their experiments, Professor Xavier declared. Before the words had fully settled, Magneto leaned forward. And when words fail, we'll remind them of our strength. If any country dares provoke us, they'll face repercussions no less severe than a nuclear power. Xavier exhaled and offered a resigned nod. Yes, you're right, but only when absolutely necessary. He paused, casting his mind back over the warnings the interdimensional expert had delivered, the horrific images from William Stryker's memories, and Wolverine's own recollections of traveling through time. Despite hoping that peaceful coexistence might be possible, Xavier could no longer deny the truth. Humanity would never fully accept mutants. Why continue to beg for scraps of tolerance, he thought. If humans cannot embrace us as equals, then we must build our own future, our own laws, our own society, our own empire. With that resolve, Professor Xavier closed the discussion. A new era for mutants was about to begin. Thanks to this plan, mutant students would no longer have to hide their powers or pretend to be ordinary citizens once they graduated. Instead, they could seamlessly join a society built entirely by mutants, using both their education and their unique abilities to support themselves and thrive. I'm in! Lucian was the first to raise his hand, exactly the response he'd been hoping for. If everything went according to plan, he was more than willing to pitch in. Not only would he help students stabilize their powers, but he'd also train them to develop new skills, further bolstering the strength of the mutant empire.